So welcome everybody to 2023's Oakland Breastfeeding Festival. Yeah. And this is our 9th year of talking about all things having to do with lactation and how we get human milk into beautiful little human beings. So my name is Samsara Morgan. I'm the executive director and founder of Oakland Better Birth Foundation, and I'm so happy to welcome you again. Thank you to those who've been with us year after year. Thank you to those of you who are new. I hope you come back again next year. And we have a beautiful lineup of folks to speak to us today and teach us all kinds of things. And there's somebody who's trying to pretend that they're Mika and trying to get into this.
Oh, you know what? It has Kathleen's picture. I'm gonna ask her if it's her. Which is strange. But I'm gonna ask her if it's her. I'm gonna text her.
Do that.
Yeah.
Isn't that strange?
Very strange.
Okay, so let us acknowledge all the beautiful things that we should acknowledge when we gather. We want to acknowledge that there are all kinds of ways to get human milk into human babies, breastfeeding, chest feeding. There's folks using the supplemental nursing system. There's the folks who pump and give bottles. And we love all of you. And we welcome all of you in all of the ways that we give this beautiful liquid gold to our little humans, right? The festival is not frowning on those who give formula. Sometimes formula is the thing to do. The focus is on breastfeeding today, but that doesn't mean that we are putting up our noses at all the other ways that people feed their children, because that's just stupid. Right? Everybody's doing the very best that they can, and we recognize and acknowledge that. So we're going to start with a little video. Actually, not a little video. It's a long video. It's about 30 minutes long, with my co-parent of the Oakland Better Birth Foundation's Breastfeeding Festival, Laura Cox. So we'll get started with that, and it speaks for itself. Everybody sees the screen well? Poor Laura, that face is interesting. So welcome everybody. This is Mamisi Samsara Morgan, Executive Director and founder of the Oakland Better Birth Foundation. And I am here with one of my so favorite people, Laura Cox. And and you are registered nurse, Laura Cox?
I am. I'm a registered nurse. I'm a certified lactation educator and counselor, and now in my 2nd year in a PhD program over at UCSF.
So excellent. I'm so proud of you.
Thank you.
And I'm sad that you're not going to be able to be with us on Sunday. This is actually the Friday before our festival, but I'm glad we were able to get you here on Zoom on Friday, because you and I are the mamas of this wonderful event. And this is our 9th year of offering these beautiful speakers and time for breastfeeding and chest feeding conversations to our community. And we had a conversation before I hit the record button about how really proud I am of this work that we both do and that we have shared. And check out our YouTube channel, Better Birth TV, because the last all of our COVID breastfeeding festivals are on there in full. So go take a look. This one, here we are again on Zoom. Hopefully next year, number 10. We're already plotting and planning. And hopefully we'll be together, live and in person. Some beautiful Oakland location to talk about breast and chest feeding and all forms of lactation and storing and CNSs and everything. All the lovely stuff. So here we are, Black Breastfeeding Week. We're still in Black Breastfeeding Week. Try to say that well. But well, first of all, how's it been since last year, my friend? How are you doing in the wide world?
It seems like, yeah, I think like it's such a benefit to have some things that are available via Zoom, so like you feel like you have more access, but then there are some things where you're like, I feel like I haven't seen you in so long, or I haven't spoken to you in so long. So even though that's not true, we've connected quite a few times, but when you don't get a chance to touch and see and smell and be together, sometimes you forget about those interactions. So I'm hanging in there. I'm in school, so super busy. Still, I'm instead of a labor nurse now, I'm a postpartum nurse, which brings me a lot of joy, right? So lots of babies and boobs and cuddles and kisses. So those are things that I really enjoy and love. So that's good.
You're on the front line of lactation there.
That's right. I am, which makes me happy. I really enjoy that. Not only to be able to support, the lactating population, but also kind of get like a taste of what's happening. Like, for example, how are people being set up for success by institutions, or what can we do as nurses to better help support, or what am I seeing a lot in postpartum that could be avoided or better managed prenatally? Things like that kind of get my brain rumbly and tumbly.
I'm glad you're keeping an eye on that, because someone really has to. I do think that the system very much sets parents up to fail at lactation.
Definitely.
And one of the biggest things that we're seeing is that this induction at 39 weeks on healthy pregnancies is just so not helpful. Yeah,
I will say that, birth outcomes do definitely play a significant role in lactation in terms of like its physiological components, right? Like, excess fluid, and then you add on trauma that can happen along with that, or postpartum hemorrhage, or all of those factors that play a significant role. But I also hear a lot, which I still find to be shocking after doing this work for, gosh, I'm almost at 12 years doing this work. And what I find to be interesting that's continued throughout my 12 years of working with the lactating population is the sheer shock of how challenging lactation is in that first beginning, right? The lack of knowledge or support for people to achieve like prenatally, so that when they finally get in the moment, and I think like their brain's like, sweet, labor's done, baby's out, I'm safe, baby's safe, we're good. And then you have lactation, it's like, whoa, this is a lot harder than I thought it was going to be, or this was a lot more challenging. So I get a lot of questions in those early phases of, I don't have enough milk, or my baby's constantly nursing, I don't think they're getting enough, or, things like that, where we're not having meaningful conversations with our prenatal population about infant feeding and what does it look like in those first few days, because it's constant, right? You just gave birth, there is no napping, right? There is no, I get to rest for 8 hours and recover. This is why we're all tired. This is why we have Mother's Day, because we're just at this point baseline tired, right? And so you're exhausted. You just had this birth and whatever it was, and now every 2 hours you are going to have to feed the baby, whether you do it from the breast or from the bottle or whatever. No matter what's happening, babies will be fed and you're going to be exhausted. And I feel like that's a really big, that's a big hurdle, a big struggle, a big thing, like, whoa, I didn't expect that. And they associate that with lactation. They associate that with breastfeeding is hard or whatever, without recognizing like, I still have to get up. I still have to wash bottles. I still have to do things no matter what's going to happen. And that is something very hard to I think it's hard to convey in a postpartum space. Like this is expected. This is normal, to where like, absolutely not. I can't do this. Right. And then they give up, and then they realize like, oh, it's hard already, you know?
Yeah, I mean, and also without all of the extra hormonal supports that you're given when you just physiologically birth your child.
Right.
There are hormonal supports that your body will give you to help you deal with being tired, to help your little one is like programmed to come out of your body looking for the boob, you know, or looking to be fed. And so when that's been tampered with, when the whole relay has been tampered with, it becomes way more difficult than it is. It's challenging, period. But then they add another whole layer of challenge on top of it.
And then also like that, those, you know, those outcomes also in turn can be shared by the infant, right? Where I could have increasingly sleepy infants, which also then creates its own pathway of barriers or challenges to get baby latched. And now we have a lot of interventions set up to deal with that as well. So it definitely is a balancing act, and birth definitely plays a significant role in lactation.
I'm remembering what I really specifically wanted to talk to you about, because you're the only lactation education person who in my career, which is lengthy, right? That really shined a bright light on the importance of that first week of breastfeeding.
It's clutch.
And
so important.
I would love you to chat about that some. Like, what's so important about that first week?
Yeah. Oh, man, this is my favorite thing to talk about. How is that possible? My favorite person and my favorite thing to talk about happening all the time. Okay, I'm gonna try to stay focused, because I can get really excited and I go all kinds of different places and all these different tangents. So I'm going to do big broad strokes and try to understand or try to convey why it's important in the first week. And really, it goes in the stages of lactation. So the two big stages that are really important to understand is lactogenesis 1 and lactogenesis 2. And when we're in lactogenesis 1, which is what happens prenatally, right? I call it the Whitney Houston phase. Because I'm every person, I'm every woman. You know, when she sang that song and she was pregnant, and that music video, it's still one of my most favorite songs. And it is lactogenesis 1. You're making eyeballs, you're making fingernails, you're making milk, you're doing all the things, right? And so in the Whitney Houston phase, you have two hormones in play, and that's progesterone and prolactin. Whenever progesterone's around, it will always inhibit prolactin. It's like the man, and will always keep prolactin down. And prolactin is the hormone that's really responsible for stimulating milk, for making milk, for telling your body we need to make milk. And so we have a little bit of it. And because of this balance between progesterone and prolactin, where I have a little bit of prolactin and I have progesterone, that now I make colostrum. So I'm not going to make a ton of colostrum, because right now, especially prenatally, baby's inside. I don't really need a bunch of colostrum on the inside, right? But when baby comes out, I still make colostrum, because there's so many benefits behind colostrum, right? Immunological factors, proteins that line the gut, close the infant gut, that microbe that we're talking a lot about, how that plays a significant role in intelligence and risks to diabetes and cancers, and just like a whole plethora of things of why colostrum is so important. And so those first days, we need colostrum. But we have to remember, right, with lactogenesis 1, we have progesterone and prolactin. At birth, we deliver the placenta, and the placenta was really what was feeding our system with progesterone. So when the placenta takes off, our progesterone levels start to go down. They go down pretty significant. And as they go down, prolactin skyrockets, right? The thing that needs to be really hit home here in this transition between progesterone leaving and prolactin going up is that the cells that are responsible for making milk need to get the signal to make milk, and they get that through prolactin. But you need to create these, they're called prolactin receptor sites. I almost want to get them like tattooed on my belly, like prolactin receptor sites, because really that's what's responsible for our milk supply at 3 months and at 6 months and at a year, right? Is that if we have if we have enough prolactin receptor sites to accept prolactin signal, then we will be able to make milk for however long we choose to, however long the dyad would like to. But the only way you can make prolactin receptor sites is through nipple stimulation and milk removal, like removal of colostrum. And if you don't do enough nipple stimulation and milk removal, then the body doesn't get the signal to make these prolactin receptor sites. And then if it doesn't get enough information to make those prolactin receptor sites, then the cells that are responsible for making milk won't get the signal, and you just will not have the milk supply. So, and this is what we know is the phrase, as we start to move from lactogenesis 1 to lactogenesis 2, this is what we know is the phase of like your milk coming in, right? Like your milk coming in, like I'm Elijah, and I'm like waiting for Elijah to come through the door with my glass of wine. I'm not waiting for anything to happen, right? My milk isn't coming in, because the power isn't in me when I say that. Well, we're going to wait for your milk to come in. You know, that power now belongs to somebody else, right? Like, this belongs to me. Doesn't belong to you. It belongs to whoever's coming in at that time. But remember, we were Whitney Houston like 2 seconds ago. Wasn't I just Whitney Houston 2 seconds ago? So no, through nipple stimulation and milk removal and the creation of prolactin receptor sites, then my milk will increase in volume because more of those cells are getting stimulated, because I have put baby to breast every 2 hours or on demand. I've fed my baby 8 to 12 times in a 24-hour period. And so with that, or more, as a matter of fact, in these first 3 to 5 days, baby will, what we do call cluster feeding. Baby just nurses and nurses, because babies know, if I do nipple stimulation and milk removal, then I will have a milk supply where I can survive. The babies are not dumb. They've never been dumb. They're very, very intelligent. We're the ones, we're the ones with the problem, right? Well, and so with that, then, if we have increase of nipple stimulation and milk removal, we make more prolactin receptor sites. And with more prolactin receptor sites, we have more cells that are stimulated, and more cells that are stimulated are going to make more milk. And so then as we move into what we commonly know under lactation, which is the supply and demand, then it's the infant or the dyad that drives the milk volume. And then you have the cells that will receive that stimulus, like, oh, I need to make milk, or I don't need to make milk, or I'm good. And then you manage that from up until the point where everybody decides that they're going to be all done. So I hope that was, I can go all day about it.
No, you definitely got it. I'm glad to have that. We want to keep talking about it because, of course, since I got that clarity from you about the importance of what's going on in that first week, I, of course, as a doula, share that with my clients a lot, because there's this thing about everybody wants to wrap the baby up in the cute little hospital blanket, and they all are adorable, and we all want our baby burrito picture, but that kid really does need to be close to its parent's body, you know, close to mama, and smelling her, and being and signaling to her body that there's a baby here that needs feeding.
Exactly that. And when I see, and no offense to the family members and the grandparents, but I am definitely that nurse where I'm like, okay, baby needs to not be in the grandmother's arms right now. When they're with me in the hospital, that's day 1, day 2, day 3. The dyad needs to stay together all the time, every time, skin to skin, licking, kissing, touching, because you have to remember, right? This is all this baby knows is this person. They know their smell, their heart rate, their breath, everything. And so when they're removed from them, they don't understand. It doesn't make sense. All I know is this, and now I have to sit in a box, and it's quiet, and it's weird, and it's light, and it's, it's cold, it's whatever those things are. And so as this baby transitions to being earthside, they need to be with their person. They need to be with and I'm talking about both parents. I'm talking about this, whatever that situation is, they need to be, that dyad or that triad needs to be together, like touching all the time. And then grandparents or family members or whoever, you come and you celebrate, you bring food, and you do dishes, and you clean the house, and you do laundry. Most of the time when I go visit new parents, it's pretty much what I'm doing. I don't need to hold babies. They're cute. They're super cute, but I don't really need to hold them. That's not my job right now as their community member.
The culture is so baby hungry. I really think they are, in a way. I mean, a lot of people really just don't have access to little kids to the door.
And they want to help, right? You want to help. You want to take, here, let me take the baby. You know, it's okay.
I think people want the endorphins that you get when you hold a kiddo.
I see.
Okay.
That makes sense. Yeah.
You know, because there's nothing, I mean, definitely it's calming to me when I did a lot of postpartum night work. Oh my goodness, you know, sitting in a comfy chair with a sweet little newborn. Oh dear, it's heaven.
It's very cute. They're very cute. I agree.
And where they really do need to be is with their parents. And especially the parents that's feeding them.
Exactly. And those first few, and that first week, and when it comes to lactation, I mean, really, it's that first month of that steep learning curve and that frequent between cluster feeding and growth spurts and all of those things. It's a plethora of challenges, and if that person doesn't have community support, or if they don't have the support of a doula, or if they don't have support of any kind of lactation person in the community, whether that's an IBCLC or a CLC or somebody like me, or like a WIC breastfeeding peer counselor, who, by the way, you know, are single-handedly, you know, keeping breastfeeding rates high and trying to keep people breastfeeding and supporting them in that. So big, huge lift up to our WIC breastfeeding peer counselors. So they're amazing.
Absolutely. We're so grateful for them. And we're
definitely
working in communities that sadly have, they literally have none of those supports. So, you know, we're very grateful for peer breastfeeding counselors. And so many of them that I know, you know, folks who started out as peer counselors are now breastfeeding consultants. So that's nice to see that growth as well.
Definitely, that's an excellent point. I think that it was both the IBCLE and WIC that found a pathway for those people to move into advancement within certification, but that's new. So I'm very happy that they've made those changes and amplified the fact that lactation support has definitely been a female, white, women-led profession for quite some time, and it hasn't served us in a positive way, to be honest.
That is a very good point.
Yeah,
that is a really powerful point.
Yeah, I mean, as being gatekeepers, and I will say, like, I've considered being an IBCLC, and I mean, as a nurse, I needed, I think it was like the state of California required that I had 800 hours of service, like precepted hours of time, and in all facets of nursing, whether it's public health or you know, inpatient, outpatient, all of those experiences in order for me to be able to sit for my boards. But for you to become a lactation consultant, you need 1,000 hours of volunteer time. So this is time that you have to dedicate to find someone that's willing to precept you, and you have to do it for 1,000 hours. And if you think about it, a lot of those, you know, white women IBCLCs that were helping other white women get that, or other, you know, people of privilege that were able to spend 1,000 hours unpaid to move forward with this without even considering before being considered to sit for the boards also. So I think, like, it's a step in the right direction to allow more pathways to have more access. I think we definitely need to do more, but it's a step in the right direction.
It's a huge step in the right direction. It's huge. It is so important. I mean, I think I know so much of the work that I do with clients is I show them videos of things, because so much of the stuff we do as parenting, just organically, historically, we've learned by watching other humans do it. You know, so if we were all in our respective villages, and all human beings initially were beings in villages, right? And so little girls and boys saw breastfeeding because they saw mom, auntie, grandma, lady down the road. Started doing it. And in Latin cultures, before people got colonized and made crazy by Christians, I'm a Christian, I can say it.
I'm not.
Well,
that's okay.
I can say it for you. I can say it.
Yeah,
But
I agree. I totally align with it. Yeah, but I'm with you.
yeah, I'm like, because we gotta cover it up. Like, why? I mean, why? And if my clients are in their own home, and like I come in for a postpartum visit, and mom's fully dressed like she's going to work. I'm like, didn't you have a baby?
Right?
What's going on? I didn't even want to put pants on, and I had beautiful birthing experiences. I'm very blessed for that. I didn't feel like having pants on.
No.
Laying around in my favorite nightie suited me really well.
Yeah.
You know,
I agree.
That's some folks that are not feeling free. I know they need to. Sometimes folks are just cute, adorable, and silly. It's like, you're gonna get all dressed up for me. I was there when you gave birth.
Right? I saw all the things. Yeah.
You know, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's something beautiful that we share.
Yeah.
And, you know, and you get to continue that for your lovely little baby who just the smell of its parent is ambrosia to a little newborn. Just ambrosia.
Yeah. I agree.
And that's nice. So that's one of the things that I really loved sharing with my teen moms. I share it with all the moms, but especially when I was working for 14 years, I worked almost exclusively with young mamas having their babies who were aging out of the foster care system. And Laura was our champion of helping these sweet mamas with breastfeeding. And these young ladies still, if I bump into one of them on the street, which I'm bound to do at this point in my career, I run into clients all the time. I'm like, how's Miss Laura doing? How's she doing? And I'm like, oh, she's doing great. She went off and became a nurse. And they're like, oh, I think she's a good nurse. Like,
oh my goodness. I was just thinking about that time as well. I mean, one of my first experiences with working with our population, then it was a whole situation of why this person was having a hard time getting baby to latch, and we had done all these things, and she had texted me at like 11 o'clock at night with a video of that baby on the breast, and I cried. I was just so beside myself she had overcome all of these obstacles, and I want to breastfeed, and she did it. She crushed it. She, on her terms, I was just in complete and total, utter awe of her amazingness. In that video, watching that baby, I think I showed it. I watched it so many times. I showed it to my husband. I was like, oh my goodness. And it was the most. And in my mind, I'm like, this is it. This is what I want to do. We got to do this. This is it. This is the thing. This is the dream. It is. So.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I'm glad that folks like you exist. I'm glad that folks like me exist.
Me too.
And I also am so sad that it is so hard. I don't think it needs to be as hard as it is. You know, and I don't think that we have to give up all of our technology in order to be respectful of our biological basis, you know, and to be more, we don't have to throw out everything that's anthropologically possible, you know. So it is harder because folks haven't seen it. They don't have good experiences of it, and the folks who are trying are being waylaid by the way over medicalization of birth. Probably definitely much more now than when I was having babies. I my twins are as old as my practice. My twins are 43 years old. And
Mm,
watching it get progressively more medicalized. And that's
mm,
scary because it was bad when I started.
mm-hmm. Was.
But the C-section rate was 25% when I started, and it's 33 and up, depending upon what hospital you're in.
Exactly. It's exactly it. That's it. And one of the worst in the developed nations in terms of
If
maternal
not those,
mortality.
if not the, and it should not be that way. We also need to talk about things like making sure people have adequate time off.
Paid family leave.
How
Yeah, I mean,
about that?
us in California, this is I think one contributing factor is why our breastfeeding rates are the way they are. And people are still shocked, like, well, why at 3 months are people stopping breastfeeding? Like, I mean,
You have to go back to work.
I have to go back to work. I have no choice. Like, we have work policies that are supportive. We have small businesses that are supporting on how can I support my lactating employees? I have no idea. What can I do? Right? I mean, I think that we're not addressing big pictures, right? Like, people are under the assumption, well, you have to give people this access and you have to give people these rights. And instead, I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to pay for that or do that or implement that or anything like that. And I feel like that's a legit, that is just as legit as this person needing to have support, you know, to provide human milk in whatever fashion that is, right? That means working part-time or whatever that is, right? I don't think that we're considering all the things, and I find it very challenging that we're not considering all the things where, you know, 2 years ago we were shut down and meetings that could have been emails are now actually emails, or working from home, which was never a possibility, is now, right? So I think we can pivot. It's like, will we, and under what will be the driving factor, right? And lactation is just not the moneymaker, right? It's not the big ticket.
It's very frustrating because there are studies to show that when you support your employees' biological needs, they're better workers.
Right.
So it's not about empowering all these people to be scofflaws and not, you know, because if they're paying them hourly, they're pissed off that not every single little, but people compensate for that.
Yeah.
And people are grateful to have been given the opportunity to, you know, what the I don't know what just happened there.
It's a lot.
But
yeah.
It was a lot. You well up with emotion. But one of the things that COVID did that was actually helpful for everybody is that, people are like, I like being home with my kids.
Right? I thought like you know, when we all got paid that 1 month where we got like, and I'm like, this is it. Like, this is where I start to really align. Like, I think we need to have, you know, just imagine if you got $1,000 a month that just gave you that extra cushion, just gave you that little bit of extra. Like, maybe I don't have to work full time, or maybe I work full time, but now I can start saving for vacation, or I can start, like, just fairness. I can pay for therapy. We can go anything, like just that little thing that you can check off in the stress load that is our lives and our care and our, like, all the things that we have to manage, right? If we had access to that, what that would do, you know, what we're paying for childcare is
ridiculous,
astronomical. I mean, it's just on top of what we're here in the Bay Area, we're paying for rent or gas, or, I mean, you know, I live here in Vallejo. I have to cross a bridge, you know, like toll, all these things that there's no balance, and it makes it more and more challenging to try to find resources or ways for us to manage. And the only way that we can do that is by staying together. The only way that we can do that is amplifying our community leaders' voices, our elders, the people that have been doing this for so long and are still saying, why aren't we doing this? Or why can't we have more funding for this? Why can't we have these things? And I start to see that with researchers now by using, community advocate boards where they bring in community leaders in whatever topic or area that they want to do research, and they ask them, what does your community need? What can we do? What voices can we amplify?
That should
Where
be
can
the
we?
first step, really. That should.
And we're just now starting to do that, right? I know the Milk Lab has been doing that for quite some time. Going to different communities and asking them what's important to you, what do you need to have uplifted, what would you like to hear, what do you need, right? And I feel like why haven't researchers been doing that from the jump?
Forgive me, Don, but I have to put you on pause for. Okay, so thank you for that little pause that had to happen. And yeah, I mean, all the things that we are discussing are so important. And I know specifically during this month, there are people all over the country having various conversations. And this week, folks have been talking about the importance of Black folks lactating and breastfeeding. We need to do this stuff. So our little ones, it's a wonderful feeling knowing that you're providing that nourishment for your little offspring. And breastfed babies get to be these beautiful chunky monkeys, and then high fructose corn syrup doesn't have to play any role in that process. Imagine that.
No.
But I always want to give encouragement to folks who might be having struggles right now. Please reach out to Oakland Better Birth Foundation to find a wonderful lactation educator or lactation counselor. We know all the best ones.
Mm-hmm.
If we don't know about you, let us know about you if you're out there.
Mm-hmm.
You're a lactation educator, a lactation counselor, and particularly if you are one of color, if you're one who speaks Spanish, if you speak Mandarin. We want to know where you are. We want to send folks to you so that you want to keep you busy, keep your rent paid. And we want to make sure that folks who want to breastfeed have the support that they need to do that. And I want to thank my beautiful sister, Laura, for showing up every year, no matter what's going on in her life, showing up as best she can. That's why we're doing this recording this year, so that she can be working and being a wonderful RN on Sunday. And I know you are you're appropriately modest as an ally, and I love you for that. And I also do want to lift up the fact that you were there for years for our beautiful teen mom population. With that group of women that we work with were mostly women of color, and the care that you gave them was exquisite and kind and competent and caring, and that should be lifted up.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And I also would like to lift up just the amount of amazing doulas that you're putting into this community. I mean, I see some of the doulas that I was teaching through the Better Birth Foundation out there on the floor, or I see them out there, protesting or making big, huge waves out here in our communities, just as they should, just lighting fire to all the paths that need, and just I could not be more proud. There's so many times where I see them, I'm like, what? You're crushing it. And it is such an honor to have been a part of that circle and to watch that. And I want to thank you for all that you do, Samsara, which is like a lot. And then what the Better Birth Foundation has done. I have been a part of this organization for quite some time, and I could not be more honored and proud of what's happening. It brings a tear to my eye just how amazing, and the things. I mean, we've been together for quite some time, and we were together before we even started this, so we're beyond our 10 years together.
That's our
I mean, when you think about
older, our friendship is
I mean, so it has. The journey and the the things that we have seen and the things that we have watched the birthing and the lactating population shift and move and pivot and go through it's profound, and it is amazing work. It's very hard work, and so being able to share this work with you is an honor, beyond an honor. And while I can't be there for our Oakland Breastfeeding Festival, our BFF, it will always be our BFF. It is our baby, just like how you say, and all the time. And I can't wait for next year, to be perfectly honest.
We need to start plotting.
I love this year. This year is good too. This year is a good year, right?
Absolutely.
But I mean, 10 years,
that's a very big deal.
I think that's something. I mean, that's something. Kind of excited about what it's going to be.
Think about that. Let's start thinking about that now. Your suggestion about that earlier, I really was like, yeah, you want to make it shine and make it sparkle.
Right. Because I think it's like important to recognize right now, like we do this work because it's needed, and we amplify these voices because these voices need to have that amplification, and they're here, right? It's not like we're creating these voices or something. They've been here and they've been loud. So how can we help make it louder, right? And that's, I think, one of the foundational works that the Better Birth Foundation does. And
Sure.
But I do want to say that Black women are breastfeeding, right? Our rates are going. Our Black breastfeeding initiation in hospitals or whatever are on par with everybody else, right? They're up there, right? They're up there. But it's how can we sustain? What does that look like next? What are our Black leaders saying that we need, and how can we make that happen? What does community need, right? All of those things are just so important. And knowing that work that the Better Birth Foundation is doing is making impact. They are making a difference. Our doulas are out there crushing it and supporting birth, and our birthing population, our lactating population are doing the thing. They're breastfeeding and they're birthing, right? So step one. So how can we sustain that? How can we keep it? How can we keep moving that forward? What do we need? What do they need?
Little ones, benefit from breast milk for as long as the child and the mom feel comfortable doing it.
That's right.
There's benefits to toddlers,
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I mean, there's always work to be done.
All the time. Year 10.
I'm honored to do it. I'm honored to do it with you.
Same.
So on that note, we're going to say goodbye. The rest of the festival is going to continue in a little bit. And maybe depending on where we are in the schedule, we might take a little break after this recording. And we'll see you again really soon. I love you, Ms. Laura. Take good care.
I love you, Sasa. I'll see you soon.
Family. Yes.
I will. I'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Victoria is 17.
Okay, we are not talking about lovely Victoria today. Hi there, everybody. We are back. And Ms. Mika, I am so envying those earrings are fire. So we are running late. So exciting. But our next speaker should be midwife Sydney Jones. Are you here, Sydney? There you go.
I'm here. Hi.
There you go. Well, I know that we have cut into, your time is short, but I'm sure whatever words you would like to share with us will be exactly what we need to hear. So,
okay. I'm going to be talking about physiologic birth and breastfeeding, and I did put some slides together. So let me just.
You should have screen sharing. Feel free. Please tell everybody who you are.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Sydney. I'm a licensed midwife, a certified professional midwife, and an IBCLC. And right now I'm taking a little bit of a break from midwifery to focus on lactation and take some time off call. So right now I work for WIC through the West Oakland Health Council as their breastfeeding coordinator and peer counselor supervisor. And I also work at CPMC doing inpatient and outpatient lactation support in San Francisco. So I'm doing lots of breastfeeding month things. We just had a big peer counselor training last week that was virtual, but it was a week long and it was open to people all across the country. And we had,
Great.
I think, 170 people register for it, but maybe closer to 100 people actually completed the whole training. So it was,
Pretty good.
yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
So we had a team of 5 Black lactation consultants that led the training, and it was really cool. So we did that and a couple other smaller things for breastfeeding month and Black breastfeeding week. So, okay, let me get my slides up. So let's see. It's taking a minute to load here. Physiologic birth and breastfeeding. So just a little basic rundown on what exactly physiologic birth is. The idea behind physiologic birth is that this is kind of what would normally happen if we don't intervene. So labor, birth, postpartum, kind of all of these things unfolding on their own, in their own natural way. There's lots of studies and evidence behind physiologic birth and the benefits of it. It's generally a safer way to give birth for healthy birthing people because we don't have any kind of interventions that are going to disrupt the normal processes and potentially, make things go a different way that they need to go.
Mhm.
So physiologic birth, you'll see that more often in out of hospital settings, or people are opting to be in their own space and having unmedicated births, limiting interventions, things like that. But it's possible to get close to a physiologic birth in the hospital as well. Plenty of people need to birth in the hospital or want to birth in the hospital, and there is no issue with that. So what happens during a physiologic birth? Typically, labor begins on the body's timing. So we're not inducing labor, we're not giving medications to start things, given that we're in a healthy time zone in pregnancy, like 37 to 42 weeks. But letting labor start on its own. Sometimes labor starts and stops. Sometimes it's confusing. We don't know whether or not someone is actually in labor, but that is a normal thing that happens with physiologic labor and birth. And along that same note, labor progresses on an individual trajectory. So we're not trying to make people, sorry, I'm getting text messages. Hold on one second. Just gonna silence that. Okay, sorry about that. So along those same lines, labor progressing on its own individual trajectory. So people are not needing medications to augment their labor. We're not rushing things for the sake of just getting a baby out of somebody's body. Sometimes there are reasons that we want to speed labor up, but in general, for most healthy people in a physiologic labor and birth, we're not rushing the process or kind of defining where they are in labor and trying to make them be somewhere else. Laboring people move freely in a physiologic labor and birth into positions that feel right for them. So not being confined to certain spaces, not being forced to stay in a bed or having feet up in stirrups. Sometimes, especially in hospital births, doctors or midwives in the hospital feel certain positions give them better access, better visibility, more control, but sometimes that's not what people need in labor. So being able to move around freely is necessary. Laboring people eat and drink for nourishment as desired, so no limitations on when they can eat and drink or what they can eat and drink. having laboring people push intuitively. So no excessive coaching of pushing. I've been to a lot of births where people do need some support with pushing, but in general, you kind of want to follow them in the beginning and like, see how things go, and then going to a little bit more hands-on if necessary. But typically the body knows what to do, and the person who's giving birth can follow their body and figure out pushing. So limiting coaching during pushing. And then again, birth happens in many different positions. So when we're pushing a baby out, when the baby's crowning, we're not forcing people to be on their back with their legs in stirrups unless that's where they want to be. What happens after a physiologic birth? Baby goes to the birthing person as soon as safely possible, which is most often right away. When a baby comes out, they can go right to their mother's chest or body as high up as they can go. Baby goes to the breast as soon as they're ready, which often, again, is pretty immediately after they're born. Expectant management of the third stage of labor. So for those who don't know, the third stage of labor is the time between when the baby is born and when the placenta is born. And expectant management of the third stage of labor is kind of more of a hands-off, watch and wait approach versus doing things like pulling on the cord or giving medications to help or try and help speed up the process of birthing the placenta. So we don't want to do that. No separation of the dyad being the person who gave birth in the baby. So we want to keep them together, same room, ideally skin to skin. Protection and promotion of the golden hour. I call it the golden hours because it's the first few hours, not strictly the first hour. But in that first hour or two after birth, protecting the baby's ability to explore the breast and feed at the breast as much as they want to, and really supporting that. And no routine bathing of babies. So these are just some of the things that happen after a physiologic birth. Some common practices that prevent someone from having this type of birth situation. Bright lighting is a big one. You see that in a lot of birth settings. It just makes it hard for people to relax, hard for those good hormones to flow when the lighting is so bright and harsh. A lot of providers feel like they need that bright lighting to see, but there's a good balance where, you can have the light that you need, but also keep the atmosphere nice and cozy for the person who's giving birth. Presence of strangers, we know that birthing in the hospital a lot, there's going to be different people that you've never met before. So some people are more sensitive to that than others. Having new nurses, new doctors, new midwives in and out of their space can make it hard for them to stay in their labor zone and really progress. Frequent interruptions, people are going to ask questions and offer interventions, and that also makes it hard for people to remain in like a physiologic space. Leaving home is arguably a big intervention. And once people are outside of their home or their cozy space, their whole physiologic process is somewhat disrupted. Controlling labor progress with medications, again, like I kind of touched on before, that interrupts the way the body would naturally go. Restrictions on movement, that's a big one. Excess IV fluids, we kind of heard a little bit about that in the talk that we just heard. When people are having a lot of fluids in their induction or in labor, it causes some like buildup of fluids or some swelling, and that also goes to the baby as well. So when babies are born to someone who's had a lot of fluid, they too might have a lot of extra fluid, which falsely inflates their birth weight and can definitely interrupt breastfeeding, which I'll touch on a little bit more in a minute. Surgical birth, vacuum or forceps assisted births, those can be traumatizing for both the person who gives birth and the baby. Oftentimes with vacuums or forceps, there's some actual physical trauma that we can see, bruising or maybe minor cuts, sore spots for the baby. Of course, whoever gives birth via C-section, you're going to have some pain. Separation of the dyad for any reason interrupts the physiologic process, and then forceful delivery of the placenta can certainly interrupt the physiologic process. So how does physiologic birth improve breastfeeding outcomes? So there's a lot of research that supports physiologic birth leading to increased risk or rates of breastfeeding success and just breastfeeding initiation in general. So hormones are an important thing that when labor is let to unfold on its own, these hormones will kind of be in place in the proper amounts versus when you have certain medications or certain interventions, they can either increase some of these hormones too much or block some of these hormones from acting how they normally would. And so with the physiologic birth, you're kind of going to get the perfect blend. Oxytocin, that's the love hormone that we see with things like kissing and hugging. Breastfeeding releases tons of oxytocin. And in a physiologic birth where people are feeling calm and safe, their levels of oxytocin are exactly where they need to be. And when they have this calm and safe demeanor, they're more comfortable bringing their baby to their breast, more comfortable initiating breastfeeding. The baby is more easily able to latch on because there's a safe space. There's not tension or things that are restricting the baby from having access to the breast. Endorphins are something that a really important hormone with physiologic birth. Ideally in labor, endorphin levels just keep rising and rising. And endorphins are going to make people feel calm. They're going to help with how we perceive pain. So when you have these high levels of endorphins, people are perceiving pain as being less painful, essentially. There's like a burst of energy that comes with endorphins. And so in a physiologic birth, when we just got these endorphins building and building, people who give birth are feeling much better immediately after the birth, allowing them to easily bring the baby to the breast. Some of the things I just talked about, like the bright lighting and the strangers, those can cause endorphin levels to be low. And even when people get certain pain management, like epidurals, their endorphin levels immediately stop rising and sometimes drop. But this can make labor more painful, more stressful, and then care providers are more likely to respond with offering more medications. We need endorphins to have a calm birth and a calm postpartum, and to really be more alert and attuned to baby's needs, so that you're more like you're better equipped to care for your baby right after giving birth when those endorphins are really high. And then prolactin is kind of the biggest hormone in milk production. It's really necessary in order to have a healthy milk supply. And in a physiologic birth, when things go the way they should go, when there's not aggressive management of like birth or birth of the placenta, and the placenta is completely delivered and the bleeding is in a normal level and people are healthy, your prolactin levels are ideal for milk production. And sometimes when people have like remainders of their placenta left in their uterus or injuries from the birth, those can inhibit prolactin levels and make it so that milk comes in a little bit later. Can make it more difficult for baby to then gain the appropriate weight that they need in order to safely, exclusively breastfeed. And so ideal prolactin levels will make it so that a baby can get everything that they need from the breast. Just move this over. So some more things that happen with the physiologic birth that support breastfeeding. Delaying the first bath for 24 or more hours directly supports breastfeeding initiation rates. So there's a lot of good things on a baby's microbiome that come directly from the person who gave birth to them and having them feed from their body. And so we don't want to wash any of that stuff away because it can interrupt the processes. So with a normal birth where babies are not being taken and bathed right away, they have higher chances of going to the breast. Skin to skin and unlimited time at the breast helps stabilize baby. So babies have better blood sugar control, better temperature control, better breastfeeding reflexes where they're rooting and looking for the breast and opening their mouth wide, stimulating the breast with their hands or their mouth. These things are all more likely to happen the way that they should happen when the baby is directly on the parent's skin right after birth, as long as they want to be. So if we're keeping that dyad together and not separating them for any small reason, then they're more likely to have that space to breastfeed. And then, of course, if the baby's blood sugar is stable and their temperature is stable, we're going to be less likely to run into the problem where maybe the pediatrician might be recommending some formula supplementation to help regulate those things. The skin to skin can kind of stop that before it even happens. And parents learn better how to read and respond to feeding cues when they have their babies with them right away. So babies will show when they're hungry, and this is new to a lot of people when they're giving birth. And when a baby's taken away, given formula or any kind of other feeding, or maybe just kind of swaddled and bundled and, you know, wrapped up tight, parents are not going to be able to see those feeding cues, and they might not bring the baby to the breast as often as the baby wants to be brought to the breast. So again, things that happen when we're leaving the process alone to unfold how it would naturally unfold. With physiologic birthing, people have reduced risks of morbidity and mortality. So that means like reduced chances of something happening to them, you know, them getting sick or having a bad outcome from their birth, or mortality being death. There's reduced risks of those things with physiologic birth. And with that means there's a reduced risk of separation of the dyad. Birthing people feel better physically and emotionally after giving birth physiologically. Usually they have a little bit more energy, their pain is less, so they're more enthusiastic about bringing a baby to the breast versus someone who might be really uncomfortable feeling effects of medication that they've taken, or maybe even emotionally upset about some of the things that have happened at their birth. And then birthing people just tend to feel better about their experience following a physiological birth versus a birth with many interventions, and that also gives them a lot more motivation to breastfeed. Providers who are trained in physiologic birth are much more likely to be knowledgeable about the benefits of breastfeeding, and then they're more able to support people with breastfeeding and protect the golden hour, and really just kind of be an advocate for that. And there's less incidence of birth injury to baby with physiologic birth. So I have a quick little video. Can we hear the sound with that?
Yep. The sound is gone again.
You said it's gone?
I don't hear the music anymore,
Oh.
but the visuals are saying what they need to say. So it's back. No, it's gone.
Sorry.
It's okay.
That was the end of that. So that was just a little video about the golden hour and what it's about and why it's
Yeah.
important. A couple more slides I have here. So just a few tips on preparing for a physiologic birth, now that we understand why or the benefits of physiologic birth for breastfeeding. Some things I would recommend for preparing for a physiologic birth or supporting people who are preparing. Choosing your care providers carefully. So many people feel that they're kind of bound to maybe one or two options because that's what they know is in their area and everyone they know has used those options. But I think it's really important to explore different options for who will care for them in pregnancy and in birth, where people will give birth, you know, what kinds of things to expect. Interviewing people is totally appropriate. Considering midwifery care if it's appropriate. Midwives are really the experts in physiologic birth, and healthy, low-risk people, even people with high-risk pregnancies can be in midwifery care. So definitely something to consider. Understanding policies and procedures from wherever you'll be birthing and making sure they align with what you want for your labor and birth. And even that, you know, last couple months of pregnancy where people are more likely to be encouraged to get an induction for whatever reason, kind of understanding when an induction might be recommended and what they would be looking at the practice that they're working with. Childbirth education course and a breastfeeding basics course are, I think, very necessary for people before going into an unmedicated birth or any kind of birth, ideally. But, you know, if we're really wanting to protect the physiologic birth, being prepared, knowing what labor is, what happens, and having some tools with how to manage contractions and discomforts of labor. With that education, people are less likely to go against their plans and request medication or other types of interventions when they're actually in the space. And breastfeeding courses, I think, are very overlooked. So many people in the first couple of days after giving birth are really stressed out because they are seeing these little tiny drops of colostrum and they don't understand, you know, why am I not making milk? Why is there no milk? And taking a breastfeeding basics course will give people that understanding, like, hey, your first couple of days, you're not making milk. You're not supposed to have a ton of milk. You know, this is normal stuff. So they're more likely to trust the process, more likely to kind of ride it out and wait for things to happen the way they're supposed to happen. Hiring a doula, of course, is going to be important to this, not only for the labor support, but for the education benefits and help with advocacy. And then talking to family members and support to make sure that they understand what you're going for with the physiologic birth. I find that a lot of parents of people giving birth or siblings or close friends want to be supportive, but they don't want to see, you know, they don't want to see people suffer, or they, you know, they want to feed the baby. They're like, let's give this baby some formula. This baby's super hungry. We have to feed this baby. They don't understand these things because they're just not prepared. So if you're planning on having certain people in your life, making sure that they're educated on what's to come and understanding kind of what the goals are there. And I think that's it. That's my little slide.
Definitely.
There's my contact information. So yeah, questions or thoughts, or I don't
Does
know.
anyone have any questions or comments for Midwife Sydney? So folks are being quiet because they're just dazzled by all that wonderful info you just shared. And I really thank you for taking time out of your schedule to do that with us so much.
Yeah, I love to talk about breastfeeding and excited to celebrate Black Breastfeeding Week with
Black
everyone.
Breastfeeding Week. Woot, woot.
Well, if questions come up, feel free to email me or reach out. And,
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
yes, of course.
Hey, enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
Bye-bye. Oh my goodness, we are just rolling around, rolling on with the wonderful info. So next, so it's just so nice to have this festival. I just get to see all these amazing birth workers that I love. And another lovely person in particular is our Dr. Elizabeth Bolaza. She used to be a regular old person, but then she went and wrote an amazing paper and did a lot of hard work and interviewed a bunch of people and presented this thick book of things. Do you have your thesis nearby? You can brag it. Brag,
Let me
brag
go
on
grab
that
it.
sucker. Brag on that. Hold
Let
that
me go
book
grab
up.
it.
Go get it. My goodness, years of the woman's life went into it. So we want to brag.
I haven't knocked anyone out with this yet, but I could.
Look at that.
My dissertation I wrote.
All those words. So we're gonna have you go ahead and introduce yourself. It's fabulous. Introduce yourself and take it away.
Well, thanks. I'm so glad to be here. I noticed that this group of folks, I think a lot of us are very informed already about a lot of this stuff. Am I right? Like, can you raise your hand if you're like, yeah, I'm like that presentation from our brilliant last speaker was like, I knew most of that, or, pretty
Good.
up on it, right? Like everybody here. Okay. Cause I don't want to retread stuff we already know. I had like remarks, like kind of aimed at, potentially folks who didn't know as much about the connection between breastfeeding and birth, which she already did all my work for me. So, I don't
Well,
have to explain too much about that.
just to say, hun, that this is being recorded. So folks
Right.
who see it
Mm-hmm.
next month might not know nothing.
Perfect. So I'll keep it accessible, but I also saw like such a cool opportunity to get into a little bit more rigor around some of the science and the stuff that was being discussed around physiological birth in relationship to breastfeeding.
Go for it.
Yeah,
Go
because
for it.
let's go. Right. So my name's Elizabeth Balaza. I'm a big fancy PhD now. And so I'd be in the house with my research pants on, trying to really my big agenda is to transform the evidence base so that we have all the legs to stand on in doing the advocacy in the cultural transformation we need to do to have birth be awesome for every single person, to have breastfeeding be easy and delicious for every single person, no matter where they are and how they're living and what they're going through, that this stuff doesn't have to suck. And
Good.
right. And so the title of my talk today is Feeling Good Matters. And I will share I wasn't sure if I was going to use slides or not. I kind of end up riffing it anyway, even when I go through all the trouble of writing down all my remarks. I don't know,
It's
is anybody else
true.
like that? That's how I do it.
Me
So
too.
I'm going to see how sharing the screen works here. Is this going to work? Share. Okay. So how's that look for you guys? Is it weird?
It looks great.
Okay. So how's that? Okay. So the research study I did, it took me 7 years to complete, is called the Birth Pleasure Study. That's this big fat book here that I just showed you. And it's a mixed methods research study. That means I did qualitative work. That's work that looks at the stuff that you can't count, right? Qualitative data really leans on meaning, on culture, on language, on experience. And my personal philosophy around research is that should be where we start no matter what. Should start with human beings, our lived experience, our truths, especially when those truths are situated in community, in culture, and in our ancestry, right? So I started my work really diving into the experience of pleasure during childbirth with folks who had experienced it. The study really started with my own first birth because it happened to me and I was completely unprepared for that. I was surprised and shocked, and it completely changed me and took over my career. So I decided I'm in this human sexuality PhD program and no one's talking about birth. Nobody's talking about reproduction. Nobody's really talking about mamas or female-bodied people's pleasure really either in this space. I'm going to work on that. So I went to town looking at what do we know about birth, right? What do we know about birth? What do we know about the role pleasure plays in the birth process? And so turns out it's like basically nothing, right? So, right? Like who's studying this? Nobody, right? Because what biomedical research is interested in is problems and pain and issues, right? It's not really interested in well-being and the things that drive thriving, right? As much. And there's a lot of anthropological reasons for that, which I could get into. But I'm going to play nice. So in the academic literature, in the biomedical space, nobody's working on this, but me so far. And the places that are talking about the ways pleasure influences and shapes birth is really midwifery. And there are some more colloquially used resources such as Ina May Gaskin's work, that's tends not to be published in scholarly circles, but for the general public, which is awesome. But also we have people like Deborah Pascali-Bonaro and Elizabeth Davis's work around orgasmic birth. So the concepts of pleasure and birth are out there, but the research base for that is pretty null. There's mostly, when it shows up in the literature, it's like mentioned in passing as this weird thing that sometimes happens and no one knows why or what it is. And so we really shouldn't pay attention to it or give it any credence, really, right? So I took on studying it directly. I kind of mentioned that already. In my study, I really dove into the biological and psychological sides, but I was also trained by medical anthropologists and I'm in the humanities. So I married those different ways of researching and understanding these phenomena as they unfolded with my participants. So one of the things that came up over and over is the massive overlap between orgasmic physiology and birth physiology. Hormonally, neurologically, in terms of the way organs function and communicate with each other. The overlap is astonishing and largely unresearched and not very well understood. Like, I just wanted to understand what the clitoris does during labor and delivery. No papers. No one knows what the internal structures of the clitoris are doing during labor and birth, right? In the biomedical literature, this is things that we just don't know, right? We don't know. I think birthing people know, right? But it's not informing the evidence base of those who are in the driver's seat around the policies, procedures, and the politics of maternal health care in the United States anyway. So that said, I started to get really curious about polyvagal theory. Is anybody here familiar with polyvagal theory and trauma, things like that? Okay, we do have some. So I don't want to get too intense with theory if that's not gonna serve. But I do want to nod to it later on in the presentation, if that makes sense. So y'all just let me know if you want me to dive into that.
Dive into it.
Okay, let's go. All right. So you can tell I love this. This is my life. Like, I am so driven. You guys, I'm on fire about my work. So I hope you are feeling the enthusiasm in a good way, because I can't repress it if I wanted to. So birth pleasure, right? I'm one of the first people to write an academic paper about pleasure experience in the birth process that's not defining it solely based on orgasm and a sexual definition of feeling good. Because what I found in my research actually is that for a lot of folks, the pleasure that they're experiencing in the birth process is not sexual for them. It is distinct, although it is occurring in some of the same bodily spaces or with some similarity and crosstalk in terms of sensation, that it does not occupy a sexual lens for them. And so terms like orgasmic birth are really off-putting. And there's a lot of people I interviewed, or the people that responded to my study, who pushed back on that language as insulting or as diminutive of what their birth experience was about. So I just want to like honor that and expand the kinds of language we use in talking about the feel goodness of labor and birth, and to link that with breastfeeding, which has been done so well already in this space. when birth works good, everything else has an opportunity to work good. That's my stand. And in terms of the biomedical literature catching up with us, I think we'll just have to create those studies ourselves, which is what my game is. But from my study, so I interviewed 23 people who had experienced pleasure during the labor and delivery process, and the immediate postpartum. Most of those people were cisgender identified women, but 2 of them were not. One identify as a gender individual, and the other is gender expansive, gender nonconforming, Maddie, which is a marriage of the mother and mom and daddy language. So I'll use the multiple different kinds of gendered language as much as I can, and through, in my talk. But the kinds of pleasure that folks really spoke to in my study spanned the emotional, mental, spiritual, physical, and sexual space. And they weren't necessarily independent from experiences of pain or discomfort. Pain and pleasure often swapped places, interacted, and wrangled with each other. And for those of us who are connected to the ways that pain and pleasure at times play out in sexual relationship, it might not be as surprising to think that pain and pleasure aren't necessarily that far away from each other. In our experience of the body, and a lot of the ways we define sensation choreographs the way we then label and add meaning to sensation and label it as pain versus pleasure. You hear that language a lot actually in sexuality studies, and thinking about orgasm as the little death, that it can hurt so good, and these kinds of concepts. So in thinking about pleasure and pain, I don't draw a hard line between them. My study for my data revealed to me that they're an interacting layers of experience that are fluid and changing depending on context. So to get to the polyvagal theory piece, because I think this is really interesting. So polyvagal theory, in my opinion, offers a really powerful explanatory framework for thinking about why birth can be pleasurable or even pain-free. Half of my interview participants had completely pain-free labors, and the other half experienced pain, but also pleasure. So my data was pretty mixed in that specific sort of iteration of pain and pain-freeness. It wasn't across the board that if you had pleasure, you weren't also experiencing pain. But I'll leave that now to just say that if we apply polyvagal theory to the process of labor and delivery, it really can help illuminate the ways that physiology is choreographed by the way we label our experiences of sensation. So in the language of polyvagal theory, the vagus nerve is this really beautiful, amazing, very, very, very ancient structure in our body that predates mammals, right? Like we share the structure with reptiles. But the way that the vagus nerve interacts with our brain is new, and is something that's evolved since we started to become social mammals living in groups. So we developed brakes and a gas pedal to moderate our fear responses in connection with our others, right? With our peers in social groups, right? You can imagine an alligator, if it gets scared, it's just going to chomp. You can't really do that if you're living in a social group that you rely on for survival. And so our brains have developed this really nuanced, beautiful interrelationship with our internal infrastructure. So many different parts of our bodies are choreographed by the vagus nerve. It choreographs, or it can actually change the pitches of sound we hear better. It can change the way our vocal cords function. It can control our breathing and heart rate. It controls the digestion, and it also controls the uterus in many different aspects of its physiology, from menstruation to pregnancy, and yes, and parturition or birth. So all of this stuff is cued into our social intelligence, and it's in our bodies, right? Our bodies are actually correlating to our social environment before our brain can even identify that we're doing it. This is happening at the level of the brain stem before we have a conscious option or choice to react. So this is super powerful. And this is what I think doulas have been doing, but we haven't had scientific language to validate why this is so true, why we need to attend to the social experience during labor, because if we don't, default fear-based biology is going to take over and derail the functions of the vagus nerve. This diagram is an adaptation from another scholar who actually works with horses and horse training and applies polyvagal theory to horse training. Her name is Sarah Schlote, and she graciously gave me permission to use this for educational purposes and for my dissertation. So I applied her diagram to my data. But basically, the idea is that if you follow this arrow kind of up and down, this arrow sort of depicts the way our physiology changes in response to a perceived threat. Okay, so there's only a couple people who aren't whose videos are actually visible, but so I'm just going to focus on y'all. If I all of a sudden like express like an emotion, right? If I all of a sudden go, right? Like before you know what I'm doing, your nervous system is going to respond, right? And there's kind of a hilarious Instagram thing going around right now where it's like a meme where you just act terrified of something and come in the room and start screaming, and whoever else is in the room will just start screaming and running around and freaking out because we co-regulate without any intellectual process at all. I don't need to know if you saw a spider or someone tried to carjack you or whatever. You're scared, I'm scared. I'm on it. Let's go, right? I don't need to ask a question. So we are so sensitive to the perception of fear in others that our nervous system will immediately change gear and go into threat response just from someone else expressing fear or holding fear in their body. And this is something we pick up through auditory cues, through smell, through our body, through sight, right? Watching pupils dilate or open. So there's so many cues that we pick up before we can even intellectually interfere that tell us there's a threat and we should friggin' freak out and do something about it, okay? So as we perceive a threat, our vagus nerve gets tamped down, right? And we go into what's called fight or flight, you know, the kind of standard classic adrenaline driven hormonal responses. That's our gas pedal, like get the F out of there. Physiology. That physiology is in direct opposition to physiological birth physiology. It slams the brakes on everything that's in this green area that I'm calling thrive mode here. So when we don't perceive any threat, we get to live down here in social engagement. We're feeling good. There's like affiliative behavior, right? We're feeling connected. We're like in rest digest mode. We're in healing and health mode. We're just in a good zone. It feels good to be in thrive mode, right? As soon as we perceive a threat, we get elevated out of that space. We're in flight, fight. We're armed and in our defensive state. Those threats include racism and microaggressions, include classist BS and feeling threatened in terms of not understanding information that's presented to us. It's triggered by a whole host of things that we see that's standard practice in the ways that people's birthing bodies are cared for or not very well cared for in spaces that aren't designed to keep people down here in this feel good thrive mode, right? It's just not in the design. And what if the fear and the activation proceeds to climb past a certain threshold of terror and overwhelm, we actually go into a third phase, which is called shutdown mode. This is where you see people in total freeze, right? Can't talk or complete shutdown or even faint in terror, right? So this is very old physiology, right? Like lizards do this. This is something that has kept us alive for so long, where I think my life's in danger, I'm going to play dead. right? Just play dead mode. And it takes something to get down out of that physiology, right? It really takes something. And so this is where we don't have a ton of great research on this physiologically, but my hypothesis is this is where birth trauma is happening all the time, is in these yellow and red zones, or people dancing between them because, oh, you know, we're a little worried about the readout on the fetal monitor, right? Death, death, death. You could die. Your baby could die. You could die. Your baby could die. It's just like baked into the way birth is talked about. And we are saturated in a birth culture that elevates and emphasizes the danger and what you should be afraid of in birth, right? By default. So to be in thrive mode is a rebellion. I'm so clear, like to stay out of those headspaces and be living down here in where our nervous system is not in activation. That is like a revolution. And so my work is, and what I'm curious to continue to do, is to develop that. And how do we implement this everywhere birth is happening? Right? So to think about what anchoring and nourishing and emphasizing and centering pleasure, what brings pleasure and well-being and good vibes, right, to people who are in labor and birth. And my sense is that it has to happen way before people even get pregnant, because this stuff is belief-based. It's a cultural conversation we're in that has us afraid of going into labor anyway, right? We're in a culture that has us thinking that birth is the most excruciating, awful thing you will ever endure. And you should be scared, and definitely don't, you know, trust yourself about it, and, you know, default to us, right? So there's a lot of really interesting anthropological stuff I could get into in that regard too. But I mean, I only have like 2 birth books worth of material in here that I need to convert. But I wanted to share this with this group because I think we have a real opportunity to leverage this kind of information, put it in people's faces and say, hey, look, like this is the biological basis for why doulas matter, right? This is the biological basis for why having your partner with you matters. Like, this is why we need to do this mindset work and transform our relationship to our fears and intercept them and neutralize them. Like, as before you even think you want to be pregnant, right? But ideally, as soon as you decide you're going to have a baby, let's work on this. Let's get these mindset changes anchored for you, embodied for you, so you can be in thrive mode and stay there and have the best time, like the best time having your babies. Because it's absolutely possible. And dude, I mean, I have like anecdotes and things I would share, but everybody I interviewed who had experienced pleasure in birth, like they're just glowing about it. And they feel shy trying to share it with others because they don't want to, like, kind of the opposite of rain, sunshine on people's, you know, misery parade, right? Like, people suffer so much, and they deserve to have that space to process and share and like heal from the trauma they've endured. And I think it's so important. But we also have to be able to hear the good and elevate the beauty that happens in these processes to give people some proof and some fodder for breaking some of these mindset barriers so that we can really empower people to take the power back in their births. And that's what every single one of my participants had to say. And I'm just here to elevate their beautiful stories and keep working on expanding that knowledge base and making it real. So with that, I have no idea how much time I've taken up, but I'm going to move on to question and answer now. Thank you all so much for letting me share my study with you a little bit and what I've uncovered and what I'm still working on. Please connect with me on various avenues and exciting things. And I'll just switch now to questions or discussion. I really hope we chat a bit, because as you could tell, I could talk about this stuff for hours. But
I got a lot of good stuff. You're doing great.
thank you.
Anybody have questions or comments?
I have a question. Thank you for your work over the last years and also sharing with us today. It's really exciting to see a little bit of the results of your work. And I was just at a blessing way yesterday where the expectant mother, referred to her desire for pleasure in birth as like a fantasy because there really isn't information about this or stories about this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I hope I get to send this to her before she goes into labor so she can know how valid her fantasy is.
Yeah, definitely. I will talk to her. Put her on the phone with me. I'll tell her all the stories. Everybody I interviewed, I'll just give her all the best juicy snippets. Yeah.
But my question was about the fawning and like fraternal response. And is that kind of an in-between response where there's still like a leaning into the powers of oxytocin to make social, like the way that I was looking at your graph or your chart was like
I can bring it back up.
Yeah, like no stress, threat, and then like high danger. I was thinking of the fawn response is almost like, here, let's bring the threat into our cozy zone. Like we're trying to like bring you down to the regulated zone. So I wanted to ask, like clarify, like is that part of oxytocin, like trying to bring the threat into a safe space with connection?
Yeah. I think that can be really huge. My sort of oh, did I go to the right one? No, we're here in this one. Okay. So my sense of it is that any kind of conflict avoidant behaviors, right, are going to be pulling us out of thrive mode, right? Because if there wasn't a sense of anything to fawn to, right, then you're not in a disturbed state where you're perceiving a threat, right? So ideally what we create around the birthing person, and this is, let me see, did I share this? Here, I'll put this up. So in this huge book I wrote, I went into every single thing, like each of these is like a chapter. But basically my sense is that what doulas are helping do, can you see my cursor? Okay. So, what my participants, and so just to be clear, so I interviewed 23 people and then I can analyze that data and I created a survey that brought in about 1,800 responses. And half of those people reported pleasure during their birth process of some kind. The vast majority emotional or mental, like more like 30%, some kind of physical pleasure, around 25% spiritual types of pleasure, like euphoria or feeling like a spiritual connection with the divine or however their language was. And then like around 15% sexual pleasure. So that's kind of the spread of like the ways the pleasure kind of played out. And what a lot of people spoke to was the importance of this head space and body space, that they had sovereignty over their body and their psychological sphere, right, of perception. And when they had people out around them protecting their headspace, people in their relational space running interference, right, keeping that ratchet nurse out, if it just happened to be one particular nurse, that's a problem. Or that panicked family member who is texting, or right, whatever the relational trigger to have them feel like there's a threat going on, running that interference was really key. But in terms of the fawning specifically as a threat management technique, I would put that down here, like at the boundary of where you're starting to perceive that you have to act on your own behalf to dispel a threat. And we want to avoid them ever having to fawn or ever having to even feel like they need to compromise on their reality in any way to bring someone on board with them. Ideally, all that work's been done well before they're ever in labor, right? Everybody who's there is cherry picked for their alignment with and their action plan that they actually know they're going to engage with. They know what they're going to do. Maybe they've even practiced what they're going to do, right? I had one interviewee who literally, she went into Kaiser because she's like, I would have had a home birth, but money, all that. I ended up going to Kaiser. She's like, I had my head buds in the entire time. My eyes were closed the entire birth. Like I did not even interface with these folks. I was in me, I was doing me. And this was after she had an excruciating, extremely traumatizing first birth at Kaiser. And she had a completely pain-free second birth, attending to her headspace and her body space with absolute ferocity. Like no questions asked. Like, this is me. And this was, I mean, it was a complete transformation for her. A lot of my interviewees, that was the case. Their first births were terrible, traumatizing, ended in a unwanted cesarean or neonatal hospitalizations, all kinds of things that breach the dyad and cause like, and right now we're, you know, this is breastfeeding day, but compromise breastfeeding, compromise that early parenting journey, because they were shoved up here into survive mode and shutdown mode. That's my sense. I'm going to keep raising money to do the studies to actually get some of this stuff into the general evidence base to figure out more about how this literally plays out. So we could be like, look, dudes, like, you're messing up something that's already awesome. Like, can we do this? Can we do better? Let's do better. But the charm and disarm, tend and befriend, self-protect, right? By fibbing. Sometimes the fibbing happens to ourselves. I was guilty of that in my first birth. I felt like something was off with my home birth midwife. Something was off. And I was like, she's fine. She's fine. It wasn't fine. That was a huge lesson I learned in my first birth. Yeah. So this is all really deep spiritual work too. And so I think Samsara leads the charge in really speaking that into being and having people claim their spiritual power in the space of moving through this stuff, because there's no question that our minds and our spirits, the way that we hold ourselves, what we believe is incredible. It can't be overstated how important it is. So,
you know, as you speak, I mean, I'm just being flooded with the thought of being an African-American mom birthing in a hospital, and the absolute contempt that you're held in that system. Overall, these folks are not getting a warm welcome for their pregnancies. They're being funneled through like so much cattle, and with a bit of disgust and disdain. Their reproduction is held with contempt. And so imagine having to get through that and then having to go find all their pleasure sensors to give birth. It's Herculean.
It's Herculean. And so the participants that I interviewed, so I really worked hard to include folks from all different backgrounds. And so I'm really proud to say that I have amazing Black mamas and birthing people in my study, Latinas, Asian folks. I was unfortunately unable to recruit any Indigenous North American or South American folks for my study, but I want to do more of this. So there'll be more interviews. I'm not done learning about this. But the Black women I interviewed, one of them had 5 births, and their first 2 births were in the hospital. And I mean, every time I'm just like flabbergasted. It just so happened to be the Grammys, and the nurses kept coming in and putting the Grammys on in her birth room, y'all.
What?
Yeah.
I'm not, why, I'm not.
And they're like, just a minute. I just I don't want to miss the Grammys. You're having your first child, but just absolutely repulsive. And so she eventually decided she's going to have her babies at home. And it's the most delicious, incredible experiences at home. So, and I think that because we have so much death shrouding and the data around Black maternal health is so scary,
Yeah.
the whole thing lives up here, right? And then you have even more heavily policing, interventionist, like up in your business, birth management that just doubles down on the things that get people out of thrive mode. It just makes it worse.
Well,
right?
Trying to be a person of color living unpregnant out of thrive mode is a challenge and a half.
Right? Add that to it.
So add that to it. So some folks have never relaxed,
They don't
never
even
really
know
relaxed.
deep down there in that green area. And so this is where it's like the giving people 9 months or even 6 to practice when they've had a lifetime.
Of being
of-
tense and on guard.
Yeah, like
That's city life. Being a certain amount of you was always tracking, not for lions and tigers, but for our fellow citizens.
right,
So, or or for incidents of racism or what, you don't know what your connections with other human beings could be.
right.
So you do have to be guarded until they show themselves to not have some sort of weapon, verbal or
Mm-hmm.
firearm.
That's
Right.
true.
So yeah, it's this civilization thing. We have to find a way to make it actually work with humanity or do it another way, because how we are doing it is causing a lot of harm.
That's everything. Right?
There's this juiciness. And what I love about your work and why I support it 1000% is that it talks about the juiciness of bringing a little person earthside.
Mm,
That it can be this juicy thing
mm-hmm.
and different than sexual, which I really love too, because this culture is so sex addicted. It's
Mm-hmm.
just a wreck. Everything's
Yeah.
got to be about that. So it's not really about, it's just plain blissful juiciness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, some of my interviews, I
Beyond
have
that,
like an excerpt I'd love to just share. So this one woman who had a very, very traumatic first birth with a premature labor was emergency evacuated to a place where none of her family members could get to.
Mhm.
She had no birth support.
Mm.
Her second birth was totally different. And so she just kept shouting. She's like, I would totally do it again right now. You know, if you could bottle that stuff, I've never done drugs, but I'll do birth, right? Like just the most exquisite experience of her life, right? In the aftermath
Exactly.
of what had been one of the most awful, right? And in that
Exactly.
sense, I do see the parallels between sexuality and birth in that you have this aspect of our lives where we're sharing our bodies with other people. And what's the difference, right? Between it being this enriching, delicious, amazing, like just love fest of deliciousness, right? Consent, pain, fear, right?
Exactly.
But you take away consent, add pain and fear to sex, what do you got, right? Literally the same thing is happening in birth, but because we don't have in our general culture this like idea that you're entitled to have a good time or that you should have a sense of consent and sovereignty over your body in labor,
Right.
because you're just
Right.
like a hull around a precious baby and you barely exist. I was looking through, like, I'm looking for postdoc positions and different stuff that new PhDs do. And I went through a listing of 5,000 different maternal child health experts to look at anybody who might be doing work in my area in the maternal and child health research list at a very respected university in our area. 5,000 listings, 5 practitioners were doing anything related to birth itself. Out of 5,000
That's more than I thought.
researchers.
I'm glad for the 5.
And they were looking at, adjusting Pitocin stuff. I mean, they weren't even actually looking at physiological birth, but at least they were like talking about labor and delivery and birth, right? Like everyone else, it was the child health, right? Which we love our children.
Of
But in
course.
maternal and child health, when you got 5,000 researchers and only 5 of them are focused on mamas and birthing people, you got a problem. Right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting. I mean, it's infuriating actually that in this repressive patriarchal structure, negative patriarchal structure, a feminine pleasure means nothing. It means nothing. Who cares if they like it?
Right.
It's a Victorian thing. The woman should close her eyes and think of England. Like she shouldn't enjoy sex.
Oh.
And so if we can just get away from the positive thing about the orgasmic birth talk is at least we are talking about the fact that pleasure can be part of this.
Mhm.
Everyone's getting pregnant and bracing themselves for the worst experience of their life.
Yep. Yeah.
They're bracing themselves to go through hell. And
Yeah.
I'm like, well, you know, you're feeling that and little one's feeling that. And how is this supposed to go? And then you have all your medical people trained that it is the worst experience in life.
And they'll enforce it.
On TV shows, on comedy programs. Oh, this is worse than this is you know, worse than childbirth, or it's bad. You know, childbirth is worse. I'm like, why is this inculcated so deeply in our culture?
I got a whole book I am cooking up on just that question.
I knew you did. We got to stop. And I love you so much. And then you've lost an earring. Do you know that one of your earrings?
Oh, they disappeared because I'm on my background.
Oh, I
It's like
see.
making them
Yay.
weirdly and like
Okay, good.
ethereal.
Oh
Yeah.
my God,
but
nothing
thank you.
makes me crazier than losing an earring, I tell you. Nothing makes me
Well,
crazy.
thanks
So,
everyone. Please, if you're interested in staying in touch with me, like let's hang out. I can't wait to movement build with all of you.
we're gonna invite you back so you can give your whole presentation. How's that, my friend?
I love that.
All right. Kiss your beautiful family.
I will. I'm gonna stick around because I want to hear what everybody
Oh,
else has to say
please,
until they
please,
come
please.
home.
We've got more juiciness on its way.
All right, I
That's
will.
what we're talking about today. I'm so glad you won't be leaving. Stay right there then.
I
But
will.
we're going to take a 5-minute break. People have biological needs, a need for like nice protein smoothie, whatever. So we're going to take 5 minutes and be right back. Okay, everybody? 5-minute break. Okay, so everybody gets to hear my dog. And the sweet little song I just played is called Shaya's Song. And several years ago, Shaya's papa, who's a brilliant gentleman by the name of Justin Wilson, gave permission for us to play his composition that he wrote for his beautiful daughter. Oh my goodness, it's got to be at least 4 or 5 years ago now that he gave that permission. So I just like to make sure it's part of all of our doings. And her dad, Shaya, and her daddy are still tearing up Instagram, and she's just growing like a beautiful little flower. And it's just nice to see this gorgeous father engaged with his little daughter the way they are. He's definitely planted a big music bug in this beautiful little girl, and she's just singing and performing, and she's like a 5-year-old. I believe she just started kindergarten this year. Too adorable. So we are back. And who is next? Who is next is our beautiful doula, Mika K. Hold on. Oh, Mika's having tech issues. Oh no. You're not frozen on my screen, Mika. Your screen is flat and your your speaker's off too. So I won't be able to hear you if you're speaking. Elizabeth, did you want to go ahead and mention the people that you wanted to mention that you put in the text? Please feel free while Mika's working out tech issues.
Oh, sure. I just thought I would do a quick shout out to my advisors who are just giants, in my opinion, in the realm of like scholarly research around birth, like anthropologically, reproductive anthropologists and sociologists and just powerful thinkers. So I was honored to have Donna and Davis on my dissertation committee as one of my advisors. Probably most famously, recently put out Obstetric Racism. It's a book about premature birth and Black women. It was just a very powerful work. So if anybody's interested in checking that out, please do. And Dr. Robbie Davis Floyd, also on my dissertation committee. I don't know if anybody's familiar with her work, but
very much so.
So yeah, just very a giant in terms of critically analyzing birth culture and what it means to traverse these cultural domains. So I thought I'd give them a quick shout out before we move on. Thank you for that.
No problem at all. Miss Mika, are things better?
My computer is just moving pretty slow at the moment, but it is happening. So it's happening in its own sweet time. You know,
There you go, like birth.
plans, and then the plans decide that they're gonna do their own thing.
Yeah.
Good. Here, let me get to my slides. I'm gonna present. And I wanted to, so most of y'all know me, and I'll do more of a formal introduction in a minute for everyone this is being recorded for. But I wanted to bring into our conversation today, when we're thinking about our theme for this year of getting human milk to human babies, I wanted to bring into this conversation queer lactation, and just give a really it's going to be a basic intro. And I think, and I hope, especially for all of our Shipra Circle doulas and for birth workers in general, that everyone has at least this basic information. It's really important to me. I also find that in the breastfeeding month of things that happen, that oftentimes queer folks get left out of these conversations. And I want to bring that up here. So I am Mika. I'm the director of the Oakland Better Birth Foundation. I'm also a full spectrum doula, a student midwife, and a founding member of the BIPOC Student Midwives Fund. But probably what I find gives in this talk and in this space, one of the most important things I've done is give birth to 2 babies, and I breastfed those babies. And here's a picture of me tandem nursing my 2 little ones. I think my daughter was like, I don't know, 8 hours old in this picture or something. Really sweet. And my son had just woken up in the morning to meet his new sibling, and this was how they met. This was their first connection. And I'm still kind of have this like post-birth glow going on in my face.
Beautiful picture.
Thank you. And I have a little flower over all the mess in the corner. So I will get into some more pieces in a minute, but I wanted to first share a little bit about my own story and why I think this is really important. And I love the conversations, like what has led up to this in our breastfeeding festival is really helpful as primers, because I really attribute my own success in breastfeeding for my preparation in birth and in pregnancy. And by that, I mean that I was attuned to who was going to be present at my birth and made sure that they were people that I felt were really going to protect that space. So maybe a month or so before I was going to give birth, my wife and I went to a local hospital to do their hospital tour. And it was, the nurse that was like hosting this tour, just like there were lots of little things that were just, it was not outward homophobia. We are in the Bay Area, and I think people try and pride themselves in being more enlightened, but it was set up for just a system that was set up for heterosexual couples and for unconscious bias to just be there, be present, talking, about the daddies and the mommies and and like just the way that was just the only conversation. That was like the only relationships that were being recognized in the space. And there were single moms there too. And there were, there are all kinds of family structures. But that was the only family structure recognized. And my intuition at that point was like, I'm not birthing here. And we got in the car and I told my wife, we're not doing this. And I researched home birth midwives right after that. And I was very fortunate to find someone, and working as, we were not making a lot of money then, but finding a midwife that was willing to work with us on a sliding scale. And it was both a challenging birth and also incredibly powerful. And as I become a birth worker, what really stands out to me about that experience is that I could so see how, if I were at that hospital, that the interventions that could have taken place at every step of the way that could have led that to be a traumatic event. And instead it was a really hard event, but it wasn't traumatic, right? And I can walk away from that saying, damn, I did that. Like, that was hard. And I still experience pleasure, right? And for me, what I learned between my first baby and my second baby is that, like, the moment I felt pleasure was maybe the clearest sign. Like, we talk about stages of labor, right? As like we're learning about labor. And so much of that is elusive. Like, can't really pull that apart until maybe after the birth. But every time I was in labor, once I felt pleasure, that was when I knew that I was getting close to pushing. And right. And we also talk about that as the most intense time, right? Or like the hardest time or the whatever, right? Like, and I was like, oh no, that's the moment when I know I'm close. I'm close. So I appreciate those conversations. And I like to bring that up because it really did set me up personally for really wonderful breastfeeding experiences. I breastfed both of my babies for about 4 years each, and 7 years I was lactating, for a total of 7 years straight. Plus a month. If you've taken Laura Cox's class, you know these things, that you're gonna lactate a little bit longer than after you stop breastfeeding. And in that process of preparing for thinking about breastfeeding, and I use that term breastfeeding to talk about myself, but when I'm talking about lactation as a larger, just like the general people, I like to use terms like lactation and body feeding, but I use the word breastfeeding for myself. So when we were planning to do that, one of the beauties about being in a queer relationship is that we could think about things like, do we both want to breastfeed? What is that going to look like for us? Talk to friends. We had friends that did a variety of different things. And I think that is one of the beauties of queer lactation, is that we can really think really expansively about how we give our babies human milk. And just expanding a little bit more about why I think queer lactation and talking about this is so important is that sorry, let me get this out of it. Queer folks, trans folks, non-binary folks are often left out of these conversations, which by default makes these spaces exclusionary. And when you don't see yourself reflected, when you don't see your experience reflected, it excludes you, right? And we deserve, appropriate and specific and inclusive care. And if we know the benefits of giving human milk to human babies, then it really is our charge and our call to make sure that we support everyone that wants to do that. Everyone. And if we're not doing that, we're part of the problem. This is my specific belief. we also know, and like what has been mentioned today is that, the vast majority of lactating people and body feeding people report that they need some kind of help. I think it's something like 85% of people have reported that they needed help with lactating and with body feeding in particular. And so if that's the case, then queer folks are going to need that support too. Right. And when you also have specific needs. And so it's not enough to say this space is for everyone without actually being for everyone. It's not okay to just have all of the same imagery, saw all of the same examples, all the same whatever, but not include what might be specific needs for queer folks. Even in making these slides, Canva has a lot of great like graphics and images that it pulls from the web, like free resources. There is not one image of a not feminine lactating person or image, and almost every nipple is pink. Can we just say, I'm like, wow, it's either a line drawing like this or it's a pink nipple. Like, wow, we have some work to do, even in just basic, like, I want to make a presentation and talk about this. I also want to talk a little bit about what queer lactation might look like. And just like I said earlier, like the beauty of this like full spectrum of possibilities. Queer folks, many folks use words like chest feeding. I've heard it today. I love hearing people use a variety of language, but I also want to make sure that all of our doulas are like feel that like they can confidently use this language and know what these things mean. So chest feeding is used for folks who a variety of people, but it can be used for folks who do not identify or do not like to use the term breastfeeding, do not identify with their chest as their breasts. It can also be for folks who don't have breasts but choose to feed from their body. And some people use chest feeding as a broader term too. My preference is body feeding for that language, because I think there's a lot of people that don't identify their breasts as their chest either. So, right. But when we're speaking, and I like that language because it also feels pretty clear to me that when we're talking about feeding from our body, we're talking about body feeding, right? Like it's just very clear language. And of course, there's queer folks that are going to use breastfeeding too, and a lot of other terminology. There's also a lot of ways that queer folks feed their babies. So sometimes people will induce lactation. It might be a trans mama who wants to breastfeed her baby. It might be a trans father who wants to chest feed his baby. It might be a non-binary person. It might be a two-mom partnership in which one parent was a gestational parent and one was the non-gestational parent, and that non-gestational parent still wants to feed their baby from their body. And the cool thing about human lactation is that we all actually have the possibility of lactating no matter what who we were born as, what we were identified as at birth. We all can lactate. It is true also hormonally, the process of menstruating and then being pregnant and giving birth makes for an easier possibility of having an abundant milk supply, but we all have that ability to lactate. Sometimes and shared and co-nursing, which I mentioned, sometimes folks will really seek out donor human milk. Let's say if they've had gender affirming surgery, like top surgery, and no longer have the the tissues, or the milk ducts available, they might seek out donor milk if they still want to give their baby human milk. And some folks will also really will want to use supplemental nursing systems, which is, I think most of us know what that is here, but it's this picture here where you can feed your baby from your body. And even if you're not producing the adequate amount of milk for them, that they can get the milk that they need at that time. So there's a lot of options and a lot of possibilities. Of course, this is not just for queer folks, right? Like there are cis women who chest feed because they've had a double mastectomy and they no longer have breast tissue, right? And there are adoptive parents who choose to induce lactation or use supplemental nursing systems to nurse their babies. So of course there are and queer folks can be in any one of those categories. So I don't want to say that this is exclusionary of anyone else, but we're looking right now specifically at queer folks. I think it's important for us as birth workers to just have this basic knowledge of the possibilities, right? And that there's also so much more. There's so much more. I am just one person bringing, giving us this basic introductory conversation. And so I was thinking about like what might be helpful things for our queer families to know, and for providers like doulas and lactation consultants and midwives to know on very basic levels. I really think that there's nothing like connecting with peers and connecting with local folks. And in this age of having access to so many resources, which is so wonderful, there's still something so special about that, especially when we're talking about lactation and we're talking about hormones like oxytocin that come into play, right? That like being in community is super powerful. Seeing other folks like yourself body feeding and lactating is so powerful. And so I know like in the Bay Area, our Family Coalition is a wonderful like queer family group that that connects folks who are trying to conceive and also have babies together for like just that local in-person groups. La Leche League has a really great resource list for under chest feeding. So if you Google chest feeding and La Leche League, you'll get those resources. I think they're helpful. And I appreciate that kind of early on in these conversations, La Leche League has taken a stance of being in support of all the ways human beings can body feed. Finding your local queer-friendly lactation consultants before birth is also really important to establish and identify goals, especially if you are not like cisgender planning to have one person breastfeed in the couple, or however, or triad, or however that relationship looks, right? If it's anything outside of that, I would absolutely suggest getting support ahead of time and making a plan. And I do think also like social media, the imagery that we can get, it is powerful. There are some really, great people out there. Yeah. For providers, I think for everyone across the board, it is helpful to ask for our clients for their pronouns, and to not make assumptions about someone's identity, to not make assumptions about what they call their own body parts. What I was thinking about, Liz, on your presentation, when we want to keep people in that thrive place, like part of keeping people like queer folks in that thrive place is not misgendering them, right? Like respecting their humanity Using the correct terminology when talking about our bodies, like all of that is going to keep us out of this place of like defensiveness or fawning or whatever, right? Like we should not be in that survival mode place. And we're more, there's more possibility for that to happen, given the homophobic systems in which we live in. So as providers, it is really on us. And if we want to think about really creating that thriving and birth environment for our clients, let's say as doulas, what does that mean? Like, it's really like, these are some very simple things we can do. We can ask them about what their like feeding goals are. And then when we put it that way, then we can really allow for the expansiveness of what they might be thinking about or curious about. And I also think it's important for providers to just do their own research now. Like, don't wait for your clients to be your teachers, right? Because that puts a lot of pressure on them. It puts a lot on them. And we learn always, right, from our births, but we don't want it to be like, so let me ask you this question and this question. And like, that's a lot. And there are also lots of wonderful queer birth workers and educators online too that share some really great information. And there's another picture of me. I think I'm in my same robe. Baby's a little bit bigger here. Still tandem nursing. Still loving it.
It's so great when you don't have to worry about copyright, Mika?
That's why I'm like, let me just get my picture.
Yeah, look through my own life here. That's really cool.
There was also lots of like random pictures my, at the time, 3.5-year-old must have taken, because they're like
sideways,
single and this and like under boob. I was like, oh, I didn't realize those pictures were there. I'm gonna stop sharing right now. Any questions about anything I shared? Or thoughts? Anything you want to add? We can move on.
Well, my initial thought is that how grateful I am and thankful that you were available to have this presentation. It is very important that we are as inclusive as possible, and we especially as doulas, we're the ones that in the whole system right now, as it sits right now, except for individual people, because I know, people will be writing things under the video on YouTube, and I'll be having to deal with them, whatever. But, we're the ones that give the welcoming congratulations to the families who are having their kids. And we want to be as welcoming as possible. Everybody deserves to be seen. And everybody deserves to be congratulated for bringing their little one into the world and to be given the tools that they need to do that well. And so I appreciate you helping us to be expansive. I like that word a lot.
Me too.
Any questions or comments or feelings? You know me, I'm all about feelings. How you feel is sometimes more important to me than what you think. I see all the little electronic hearts. That means something good, I'm so sure.
I thought it was a beautiful introductory sort of conversation about approaching gender with a lot of love and nuance throughout the reproductive journey, and thinking about how to intentionally really use our language as a tool for liberation. So thank you so much for, I think, anchoring that and giving everyone like a concrete language to lean on because certainly we're not raised with these sort of concepts by default.
Mhm.
It takes practice and work to ingrain and like use these maybe new concepts for folks who want to support queer families, but don't necessarily feel empowered with the language or freed up to use it straightforwardly and without weirdness, right? Like there's that. I think especially for cis het folks like myself who endeavor to be as inclusive and just truly open-hearted as possible. And that has to make it to my mouth every time, right? Not just sometimes, but like clearly here all the time, right?
I appreciate that. That's so true. It's so true. And even as like a queer person, like I'm like body feeding. Yeah. Like it rolls off my tongue now. And that took me time. Like it was a conscious effort to switch that language and to be clear about also like how I can talk about myself and how I can talk about the general community, and that those things don't have to be in odds with each other. And that we, and mirroring and showing how we can be respectful of an individual's identity of who they are and how they relate to their body. And then also how we can use generalized terms as providers when we are talking about a general group of people. But it does take time, and it takes it's a practice, because we as adults have a hard time rewiring our brains, right? So like coming at it with maybe a little like just kind of sense of like play, like I'm just gonna like practice this and I'm gonna feel it out. What does it sound like, feel like in my mouth? Yeah.
So big thanks again, Ms. Mika. I totally appreciate it. And our next speaker is going to be Doula Priscilla. And my beloved Doula Priscilla has been with us, oh my goodness, a long time now. Let's switch over in a bit. I'm going to pull up. I am going to be manning her or womaning her or doing whatever I'm going to be doing with the PowerPoint for her, because she's working on a
You're gonna be dueling her sometime?
I'm going to be doing her. There you go. As soon as I find where the heck it is. Where the heck it is. Ah, I think I found it. Let's get that out of there. You go away. Go away, you too.
Pregnant for the second time.
No. Tried that before. It did not work. Where are you? There we go. So I always like to have this be part of our conversation about breastfeeding, chest feeding, body feeding. I've had enough of clients contacting me wondering how many lactation cookies they should eat. Like, what did you eat today? 2 lactation cookies. And I'm wondering why my milk supply is dwindling. So, beloveds, it took all kinds of yummy food to grow that juicy baby. And eating is part of that whole sensual aspect of growing and birthing. Like we should eat foods that we love while we're laboring, and we should eat food, yummy, colorful. Look at that table. Don't you want to eat everything on that table right there? Just everything. So that juicy, oral yumminess that hopefully you had when you made the baby, and that yummy putting things in your mouth that taste good and make you feel good and help your body run well, help you grow a nice, big, fat, pretty baby. and then eating through the labor. And then you still got to keep up the good eating to make all the yummy milk for your child. So you want to just have a talk about that. And I'm going to call Priscilla. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. So have at it. Who are you?
Oh, okay. Well, as already mentioned, my name is Priscilla, and I have been with the practice for 8 years. And for the past couple of years, I have been one of Samsara's senior assistants. So I have had the pleasure of sharing five finger eating with quite a few clients. Really glad that I get to do that here today as well. Okay. So
Oh my goodness. Hold on.
we will start from the
Hold
beginning.
on. We're at the end already. How did that happen? We didn't even finish. Go back to go here. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. So five finger eating was developed by a midwife named Valerie Alhalta, and it is an easy way to make sure that nutrition pregnant women or people are getting all the nutrition they need, especially during their pregnancy. Pregnant women need to eat all five of these fingers at each meal. So that's at least 3 times a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And using this foundation, we hope that you will have fun creating and eating meals and snacks. So, number one, we have protein. And protein is the most important part of a pregnant mama's diet because your baby is made out of protein and your placenta and umbilical cord, everything surrounding your pregnancy is built around protein. At the same time, protein also helps us to maintain every other part of our body or your body as a pregnant person. Pregnant women need 100 grams of protein every day. And it's a case whereby you could always have more, but you should not have less than 100 grams. So some examples of protein are meat, fish, eggs, beans, nuts and nut butters, dairy, and certain types of soy products. I highly recommend you stay away from GMO soy products. Number two, we have green leafy vegetables. So green leafy vegetables have calcium, magnesium, iron, potassium, zinc, vitamins A, C, E, and K, fiber, folic acid, and other vitamins and minerals that are really essential to you and your growing baby. And eating greens helps to purify your blood, improve circulation, strengthens respiration, helps to ward off cancer, and strengthen the immune system, and a whole lot more. So some examples of green leafy veggies are broccoli, broccoli rabe, kale, collards, bok choy, spinach, Swiss chard, watercress, cabbage, mustard greens, dandelion greens, lettuce, and arugula. And then we have the really pretty picture of some greens for you to take in. All right, number three, we have whole grains. So whole grains are like your little energy capsules because your body absorbs them slowly. So it gives you a little burst of energy throughout the day. And they are a great source of essential enzymes, iron, fiber, vitamin E and B complex. And some good sources of whole grain are brown rice, quinoa, millet, bulgur, barley, oats, buckwheat, amaranth, kamut, spelt, rye, or wheat berries, and wild rice. And we always say that the reason why we might suggest brown rice over white rice is because the white rice has already been stripped off of all the fiber and nutrients. So essentially everything you're eating is going to process into sugar, and we do not want all that excess sugar in our system. Number four, we have vitamin C. So vitamin C boosts and strengthens the immune system, which helps us to avoid getting sick. And if we do get sick, it helps to shorten the recovery time. And it does this by building and repairing the soft tissues, which helps our wounds to heal faster. So some sources of vitamin C are, and there are quite a few, so bear with me. Citrus fruits, berries, grapes, cherries, kiwis, apricots, plums, bananas, apples, pears, cantaloupe, watermelon, pineapple, mango, papaya, bell peppers, tomatoes, carrots, cucumbers, beets, cauliflower, summer and winter squash, sweet potatoes, yams, potatoes, corn, and good old California avocado. So you have a nice spread of choices. Number 5, we have water. And we say think amniotic fluid. And the reason behind that is because water helps to support and replenish the environment that your baby is growing in. In addition to that, water also helps to regulate your body temperature, lubricate and cushion your joints, protect the spinal cord and other sensitive tissues, and erase the body of waste through urination, perspiration, and bowel movements. We highly recommend pregnant women or pregnant persons to drink about 10 cups of water every day. It's also like the protein situation where you can always have more, but you should not have less than 10 cups every day. And the way to make sure that you are getting enough water is to check the color of your pee. So the color of your pee should be like a light lemon juice. And if it's anything darker, then you need to increase your water intake. But we love you so much. We have a thumbs up for you. So thumbs up for healthy fats, even though we know that fats have a bad rap. We like to share that fats are essential to our health. They help to remove dead cells, manage mood, brain function, and energy, and is really essential to digestion of veggies and other foods. So everything we talked about prior to this, healthy fats help us to break it down. Most whole protein foods already come naturally with fat, so there's no need to take the skin of the chicken or the yolk out of the egg. It's all good for you. Some good sources of fats are nuts and nut butters, seeds, avocados, olives, and raw oils like olive oil, coconut oil, and butter. We highly recommend that you avoid fat-free or low-fat food products, because if they're taking the fat out, then they gotta make it taste good somehow. So then they're replacing it with a bunch of chemicals and a whole lot of sugar. And again, we do not need all that sugar in our system. And like Samsara mentioned before, if you had to eat like this to help you throughout the pregnancy and take care of baby in the womb, then you want to also eat just like this to continue to produce food for your baby and helping baby grow. That's it. That's 5-finger eating.
Any questions from our posse who's like indoctrinated in 5-finger eating, but you might. So I totally want to thank you, Ms. Priscilla, for that wonderful presentation. And yeah, it all comes down to the basics when it comes to this baby making, baby having situation. And nutrition, like I forgot who said, let food be thy medicine. I'm sure it was some wonderful Greek person that said that. Hippocrates maybe said it. I'll look it up. Google is good for these things. But some wise person said that, and I have found it to be true. So I thank you for your time, Doula Priscilla.
Thank you for the opportunity.
You're very welcome. So even though we started out a little behind, a little late, but now we've got like 20 minutes to play with, and we can fill it up with stuff, or we can let it go and not be tense about it. But I do want to make time, if there was someone who was not a featured speaker, who has a burning desire to share some more information with folks who will see this video after we're done today. I wanted to give that opportunity. So, oh, I'm so sorry, Jesselyn. Jesselyn has not spoken. So we're going to be late, and I'm happy about that. So thank you for your reminder, Jesselyn. My goodness, what is going on? My blood sugar is low. But in any case, so we're going to turn it over to Jesselyn Ballarano.
Hi, Mamisi. Hi, everyone. That's a relief because, you know, I did prepare some slides. So
Yes, you did.
rather
You.
not them go to waste.
Hi, you know, one of my favorite people. What's going on? It's low blood sugar. I'm ready for dinner right after this.
That's all right. So thanks for having me. Mamisi has invited me to share on a topic that I've shared other versions of to our Oakland Better Birth network and community over the years. I've been a longtime member of Schiffer's Circle and Oakland Better Birth. Maybe this is my 7th or 8th something festival. So really happy to be here and to hear from all the wonderful speakers today. And Mamisi Susar asked me to present some more information about oxytocin and lactation. So this is going to be a little bit more specific to lactation than when you may have seen other oxytocin presentations in this group. But if you do want to see those, I think you can find some of that on YouTube for more about oxytocin in general. And it's such a wonderful segue from everything that people shared about their personal stories, as well as Dr. Balaza's presentation, Midwife Sydney's work, and everything that was shared in between, as well as in our introduction from Laura Cox and Mamisi Samsara. So thank you to Mika and Priscilla and everyone else who spoke as well. And let's just jump into it. I'm gonna make this, I want to be able to see all of you, so I'm not really sure that I do. There we go. We'll do full screen and see how that goes. So this is a little dive into human milk feeding, mammals milk, and oxytocin, and how that's really cumulatively so much more than just nutrition, which I think we've already heard a lot around today. Like, we're not just talking about getting calories into a baby's tummy. We're talking about mental health. We're talking about birth recovery. We're talking about stress. We're talking about pleasure. So hopefully I can illuminate a little bit, and that it will be a great complement to what we've already learned today. Can everyone see this okay? Hear me okay? Excellent. So we're going to jump into some aspects of the benefits and powers of chest feeding beyond just the nutrition facts. I love that we did just hear from Priscilla about eating, because also this does go into lifelong well-being and the feeding relationship and the relationship to nutrition and nourishment that we grew up with. Recognizing that infant feeding, as with birth, can be supported and successful. It can be challenging. It can also be traumatizing if it's not supported and not cared for with dignity and humility, and naming some of the systemic challenges that can get in the way of successful lactation, which is really important to maybe bring away some of the shame or guilt that some families might experience if they can't or have to choose not to chest feed for some reason. So we'll look at a little more about oxytocin, and then we've heard some pieces about it today. I like to think of it as the hugging hormone among many other nicknames. So we'll look at that and the warmth factor and the milk ejection reflex in lactation. We'll also look at happy feeding relationship goals and how that relates to this hormone and neurotransmitter. And really question, similar to how we have, looked at preventing harm earlier today, how can chest feeding or parents who are not chest feeding tap into these benefits from oxytocin, and just taking another look at what support from community and society might look like. So my primary source in terms of like hard facts is going to be this book, Oxytocin, The Biological Guide to Motherhood. And Dr. Uvnas Moberg wrote this and many other pieces of research and accumulated research over the last couple decades. So she has a variety of books at, you know, kind of different levels of general information, the psychological aspects, the science. But also I've done so much learning in this very festival over the last 7 or 8 years, and also the classes that Laura Cox teaches us on an almost annual basis. So I really have the Oakland Better Birth Foundation and Mamisi Samsara to thank for a lot of my framework and thinking about this. And it's fun to continue learning and sharing as I learn. So as it's been mentioned a few times today, oxytocin is associated with a lot of different activities, including our concepts of love, but also the act of sex, birth itself, concepts of romance, the experience of bonding and attachment, of course, lactation. And really, I think of all of these as different aspects of nurturing. So either these are different phases in the process of creating mammalian social life, or these are experiences we have along the way. There has to be at least insemination for there to be pregnancy. There has to be birth in some form or another for there to be bonding and lactation and attachment. And oxytocin really plays a role in all of these. So it's the nurturing hormone. Some people call it the love hormone. I also think of it as the hugging hormone, and I'll go into why in a little bit here. Really briefly, the fact that oxytocin is a hormone and a neurotransmitter does make it unique. So on the left, you can see other hormones, including oxytocin, which is made up here in the pituitary gland. This is just showing that hormones are made by a gland in the body, and then they may act somewhere else in the body. So all these different parts of our adrenal system create hormones. In the case of oxytocin, it's made in the brain and that travels through the blood to the uterus. Sometimes that's surprising to folks. The glands near the uterus, the ovary and placenta, actually produce estrogen and progesterone, but not oxytocin. And that's a feature of hormones. They might be created in one place in the body and then act long distance in another place in the body. As a neurotransmitter, oxytocin is faster acting and acts primarily in the brain and in the nervous system, and might affect our psychological or cognitive experiences. So oxytocin's release and its functions are a part of the parasympathetic nervous system, which we've talked a little bit about in the various presentations today as, you know, our rest and digest system, our healing and connection system, as opposed to the stress response or the fight and flight response. And I don't know if this slide is cut off or if you can see the entirety of it. That's what it says there. The oxytocin functions as a part of the parasympathetic nervous system in oppositional relationship to the sympathetic nervous system, or stress hormones like cortisol, the quote unquote fear hormone, adrenaline, and those stress responses of fight, flight, freeze, and sometimes fawn, as Dr. Balaza described. I'm not going to list every single of the benefits, but I do want to highlight that oxytocin is really for every single body, regardless of our reproductive status. And this is a mammalian feature. So any mammal assigned female, male, or intersex can have oxytocin function in their body. Doesn't matter what age you are, whether you're reproducing or not. It might be available in small one-to-one, face-to-face interactions, but also larger social units like this Zoom room, or in larger family units, or in a neighborhood, at a party, over dinner. It's really considered essential for cueing the behavior that protects, nourishes, and teaches offspring. So it's a part of our social learning, it's part of our kinship groups, it's a part of safety in the community. It does peak at certain points, and so we do see some differences between assigned sex in terms of the intensity and frequency of oxytocin activity in somebody's life. But those points of peak are puberty, fertility within the typically assigned female reproductive system, sexual arousal, pregnancy, labor, birth, and breast or chest or body feeding. It also includes neurodivergent people. So anyone, regardless of, maybe their ways of processing social information or other ways of being in the world cognitively, can still produce oxytocin. And that's great because there's lots of benefits of oxytocin. And I'm going to click through these quickly, but I'll read a few examples as I go. We've got the aspects of reproduction we've been learning about today, social bonding, the feeling of well-being that comes with kinship and calm and trust. We've seen and heard about today pain reduction, lowering stress, even lowering blood pressure and supported healing. And then on a more conceptual or psychological piece, we see the decrease of fear, improving social interaction, even how a group gets along, interpreting other people's emotions, and then also being sensitive to our own mind-body awareness, which is also called interoceptivity. It also supports digestion and metabolism and reduces the risk of cardiovascular disease and arthritis and cancer. And this says breastfeeding women because that's specifically how the research refers to those benefits. So lots of benefits of oxytocin that we really want everybody who can to benefit from, and that can start really early in life. One of the reasons I love talking about this aspect as a childbirth educator, doula, lactation educator, is that I really see nurture as a part of our evolutionary legacy, and so do the facts, so does science. We don't really survive without social kinship that helps us be nurtured from the earliest part of life into our more independent youth. And similarly, birthing mammals, birthing parents, specifically humans, need to be nurtured while they are providing for that very dependent and vulnerable young baby. And so that socializing aspect of nurturing, so taking care of someone's needs, making sure that they're comfortable, attuning to them, these are part of our social legacy as humans and also as mammals. There's lots of other mammals who practice aspects of social support. And so when you think about lactation specifically, there are these physiological and social aspects that are going into the process. And we have here two images. On one, you see a really simple symbolic representation of how chest feeding stimulates oxytocin and prolactin, and there's a feedback loop between the positive outcome and social experience and the release of those hormones. And you can see in that image that prolactin is related to milk production and oxytocin to milk ejection, and we'll get into that a little bit more. On the right side is another piece of beautiful art with a more detailed version of this same image. And you can also see here the contentment on the parent and baby's faces. You can see that they're making eye contact, and you even get a cool little view of how that milk ejection reflex actually looks. Here you see these glands of the tissue, and there's milk coming out of through the nipple into the baby's mouth and eventually down into their digestive tract. This idea that we are inherently social is also a way to reframe why lactation can be so difficult. Historically, we know that while there may have been challenges, people successfully fed their infants because we all exist today, right? Why is it so challenging for some people today? There's lots to get into around the separation, the isolation, and the fear-based language we heard about earlier today, the stressful aspects of the pressures around lactation, also the way we manage birth in the United States. But a big piece is the social learning. And I would argue that instead of thinking of survival of the fittest as just being like the strongest or the most aggressive, or the most likely to win a fight, we also know that in a community setting, survival of the fittest means being able to collaborate, being able to learn from other members of your community when you don't have the wisdom or skill set to try something. We know that survival of the fittest means nurturing our physiological capacities, and it also means mutual support. And so in a way, breastfeeding or chest feeding is actually a test of a family's community. It's a test of how that family is supported and whether or not their community or their society is showing up for them. And we see today that a lot of folks have to kind of get creative around getting support in chest feeding because we're not necessarily next door to or across the street from our close, extended, intimate family network. We may not be around chest feeding a lot. We may not see what breastfeeding looks like. And without that kind of hands-on collaboration, learning from other chest feeding parents and getting nurtured ourselves as adult parents, to allow our lactation capacities to be enacted upon, breastfeeding can be challenging. So it's actually kind of this incredible, aspect that our physiology forces us to be social in order to succeed. And when we take away social support, we see the physiological functions suffer as well. So taking another look at this beautiful image, I want to get into a little bit more about how oxytocin functions with feeding at the chest. So just, if you want to just pop off of mute, what are some behaviors? Like if you were just a casual observer, didn't know much, or maybe you were an alien and someone explained anatomy to you and said, this is an anatomical drawing. And it's a representation, right? It's not exact, but what do you see behaviorally? Like, how would you describe what's happening between the two individuals in this photo?
Eye contact.
Eye contact.
A shared exchange. They're like exchanging with each other.
Yeah, there's an interaction, there's a bond or a social exchange. They're not passive participants, each doing their own thing. It's not a plug and play. There's a active presence and attention between both individuals. What else do we see?
Well, I'm keyed into like exposure, right? Like that both are in full contact with each other, right? And also potentially visible to others, right? So this is a visibly expressed to the outside world physiological function, which we don't tend to do, right? We tend to hide physiological functions, right? Bathroom behaviors, sexual behaviors, our internal organ functions, chewing with your mouth closed. But here you have a physiological function that's just out there. And that's distinct, right? From a lot of how our culture views and engages with bodies.
Thank you. Yeah. So even assume like whether this person is like in their bathroom, in their bedroom, at the restaurant, we can assume that this person is unclothed and that and so is the baby person, and that there is, as you said, close contact and exposure and connection between their actual physical forms and both parties' physiological functions. So there's milk ejection happening on one side, and there's suckling and feeding and swallowing happening on the other side. So yes, that's exactly what we see here. We see
Let me add real quick if I could. I see a lot of love there. The parent, the mama loves the baby loves the mother. The baby's getting good information about eating nutritiously and well, that it's a good thing.
Thank you. I see that too. So yeah, we see eating or the milk ejection and suckling in tandem. We see that close contact and touch. We see the eye gazing and eye contact that was mentioned, the smiling and calm. And intuitively, we can also infer those benefits that Mamisis and Sarah just mentioned, nourishment as well, but also that social connection, warmth, comfort and safety, connection, trust, pleasure, and contentment. And you might argue that comfort and safety and connection, trust and pleasure, contentment is another way to describe what it's like when you're with someone you love. Sorry,
Sure.
I'm just moving my windows around here because I don't know when it's going to block off your view. That's funny because these are also experiences that we might have with our trusted friends or family group. So in this same image of a truly age and gender and cultural, ethnic diverse group, maybe not age diverse, they mostly seem to be in the same age range, but we do see a bunch of adults connecting over a meal. And so we see that same eye contact, we see the food, they're in close quarters together inside, so we can imagine they're warm, and it looks like they're eating fish and rice and beans, which is probably also warm food itself. And we see those same pictures, images of pleasure, contentment, relaxation, ease. So that's just a reminder that these very first social experiences we have are precursors and reflections of the kind of functional social interaction that we typically define as healthy among adults, even across different cultures. And of course, the rules about eye contact and exactly how you eat might vary, but we know that universally, gathering to eat a meal together is a social behavior across all cultures. So let's take a little bit more of a deeper dive into the physiological mechanism. And I'm not an endocrinologist, so I'm not going to go into like every little piece of every little cellular function that happens, but I am going to do my best to summarize this for you in an accessible way. I'm going to come out of full screen because I can't actually see my whole slide for whatever reason. Hold the phone. Okay. We're going to try that one more time. Sorry. Okay. You can see that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. So during feeding at the breast and chest, and you can again see this simplified image, I want to focus first on suckling. So suckling is the baby's mouth at the nipple, and it induces a few different activities in the parent's body. So when the baby suckles, one of the things that happens is prolactin is released after about 10 to 20 minutes of feeding. And that prolactin release is gonna last for about an hour. And that's a big part of milk production. So feeding, suckling, stimulates prolactin, which we already learned from midwife Sydney and in some other parts of the discussion today, is a big player in milk production. Almost immediately at suckling, within just a minute or two, we also see oxytocin in these rhythmic pulses that come about every 90 seconds. And that lasts for about 20-30 minutes. So right away, oxytocin is getting released in these pulsing rhythms at suckling. And then soon after, prolactin follows. Prolactin is going to last for a little longer. The effect of oxytocin starts to taper off a little sooner, at about half an hour. These rhythmic pulses are doing a few things. So at the skin of the chest, it's just helping to dilate the blood vessels and increase the body temperature. So blood flows more easily, temperature increases. This helps the baby to be warm. We also know that a maternal breast can decrease in temperature slightly, but this is specifically in relationship to suckling. We also, and I will get into this more, we also know that at suckling, the mammary glands experience this hugging or squeezing function again in the alveoli that hold the milk, and that's going to lead to the milk ejection reflex, which we'll look at a little bit closer. And I think it was already mentioned, oxytocin also does this squeezing of the uterus during labor. This happens during menstrual cramps. This happens during sexual arousal, and also happens to penile tissue, this squeezing or contracting hug during orgasms. So that hugging mechanism of oxytocin is really seen at all these different parts of reproduction and arousal and sexuality and feeding. Specifically at suckling, it has to do with milk ejection. We also know that oxytocin, in turn, having been triggered by the suckling, stimulates more prolactin release. So the suckling stimulates prolactin, and then so does the higher level of oxytocin. And over time, that's of course going to support milk production. We also know that, and this is really interesting, over time, so we're talking about over months, the amount of oxytocin released in response to suckling increases. So at 4 months compared to 4 days, a lactating parent is going to have higher like standing levels of oxytocin, also known as their basal level, and they're also going to have a more pronounced increase at suckling of oxytocin. So when we have an exclusively breastfeeding parent, over time, that baseline level and the response to suckling with oxytocin increases over time. I do want to mention that general skin to skin, and also the infant massaging the parental chest area, the eye contact, even the sound of the baby cooing or crying, really anything that's giving the parent visual, audio, and touch cues that the baby is interested in either eating or bonding is going to also release oxytocin. It won't necessarily be that pulsing mechanism that the suckling provides, but it does support the warmth and the dilation of the milk ducts and that whole process, as well as the psychological benefits to the parent. This is not exactly the same in everyone's body, and people's like awareness and thresholds for this vary, but people might notice the tingling sensation of the letdown at the milk ejection reflex, which we'll go into again in a minute. They might notice increased attunement to baby's needs, cues, and energy, or even mood. And there's been a lot more research on this lately, but that can be like in the moment or just in general, a parent who practices body feeding attunement to an infant. We also see that stress decreases as the parasympathetic nervous system takes over. So you may have noticed one or some of these in your experience with lactation. And similarly to the discussion we were having earlier about being trauma informed, we also can see how interrupting skin to skin time and suckling time and feeding time can stress out a parent or be an obstacle to attunement, especially if it's repeated or severe separation or obstacles to feeding. But also in the earlier postpartum period, a lactating person might notice cramping. So that oxytocin release is still maintaining its effect on the uterus, which is so important for that uterus to contract back down to size after birth, for bleeding to stop, for those blood vessels to close up, and for the uterus to go back to its smaller non-pregnant size and state. And so that's really a healthier response if there's cramping during lactation in the postpartum period. Neat. Okay, so we're going to look at this a little bit more, and I'm going to grab my little laser pointer thingy again. So this is a picture of just like a very simplistic picture of the breast tissue or chest tissue. You see these pink encircled circles here. These are the alveoli, and then there's these pathways that we're going to call ducts, and they go into larger ducts or sinuses, and then we see the area around the nipple, the areola, and then the actual nipple where the milk is exiting, and then of course there's supportive tissue and fat around that. If you zoom in on this tiny little round pink circle that has an interior lining of smaller circles, it looks like this. So over here, we actually have the alveoli is the white space itself. It's like this open space. These cells, they're called epithelial cells or lactocytes. These are actually the cells that produce milk. They fill the alveoli up with milk. And then these cells on the outside are the myoepithelial cells, and that's where oxytocin functions, and we'll go into why. So in these mammary glands, thinking of the whole system as a mammary gland, oxytocin is going to stimulate the milk ejection, and it's going to also open the milk gates. So again, we have the milk being secreted and excreted by these lactocytes or epithelial cells inside the alveolus. Oxytocin causes these outer, bigger cells to give a hug, so to speak, to squeeze around the epithelial cells, which changes the pressure because this is all in a fluid and soft tissue environment. Once these myoepithelial cells contract, there's a change in pressure, and that changes the shape of the epithelial cells from the pressure change, and they eject milk into these smaller ducts up here. So they're starting out inside this alveoli, these pink area, or this more solid line of cells surrounding the milk producing cells, squeezes, the pressure changes, and milk gets gently pushed out. And I like to think of it as a hug because a hug is never too strong. A hug is not constricting. A hug is with love. And so very different than an injection of, say, Pitocin. These are all, when we're talking about the physiological process of lactation, these are all self-moderated and regulated by the maternal system. That's not to say that synthetic external aspects of Pitocin or synthetic oxytocin can't have an effect on these processes. They do, but they're not regulated and moderated by the parental body. And so I like the idea of hug for natural or organic or endogenous oxytocin because it's never going to be too firm of the squeeze or too frequently. Once the milk is in these smaller ducts, you can picture that these squeezing myoepithelial cells are also in these smaller parts of the ducts. So those also get squeezed and their shape changes from that pressure of that contraction. And these larger ducts here, they don't necessarily have the same myoepithelial cells, but oxytocin helps to widen them and dilate the circular muscles surrounding the openings of the larger ducts on the nipple. I'm going to read that again. Oxytocin may also widen the larger milk ducts and dilate the circular muscles surrounding the openings of the larger milk ducts on the nipple. What does that sound like? Widen and dilate the circular muscles surrounding the openings. That sounds like dilation in labor. And so on this microscopic level, oxytocin is opening these sphincters, these circular muscles, these gateways for the milk to not just eject from the alveoli, but travel all the way through these ducts and out into the world, because that circular muscle surrounding that opening has been relaxed and dilated by oxytocin. And so oxytocin is actually performing a very similar function on this very small scale in the mammary gland as it does with the cervix and the sphincters involved in birth, which is that it softens and dilates and widens the cervix, which is the gateway from the uterus. So that's pretty cool. And I learned that this morning. Important note, but side note, is that at the time of the book that was written, I think this has been proven, but oxytocin might also contribute to milk production directly. We think it's actually the oxytocin receptors on these cells might help with milk production. It's also involved most likely with the regulation of growth of the mammary gland. So Laura Cox talked about early suckling and establishment of receptor sites for milk flow. We also believe that that process and how much the gland expands and how much is needed is regulated in part by oxytocin. And so that frequent feeding and that frequent feedback between the lactating parent and the baby, not only does it actually function to get the milk out of the breast out to the nipple, into the baby, it also plays a role in the long-term growth and sustainability and the supply and the demand and the functionality of that tissue to meet that supply and demand. In birth, we talk about this balance of hormones. Again, the sympathetic hormone being associated with the stress and fear hormones, but certainly necessary for athleticism, for effort. And we talk about the parasympathetic or the rest, digest, calm connection system. This balance between these two systems is really important in birth, and it's also really important in lactation. We've already seen some of that today. So the difference between just enough stress versus quote unquote bad stress or distress can make a huge difference in birth and also in lactation. And we know that sudden or severe stress, including the social and systemic stresses that were described recently around racism, around fat phobia, around ageism, around all the ways that patriarchy and capitalism, pressure birthing parents to operate in fear, that can have a really big effect on lactation too. And so I just think this image is helpful for thinking about the process in general. You actually want more of this always. You need some of this, but you don't want it to fall out of balance into the world of distress. And so in order to protect these really complex series of events that is so very much moderated by oxytocin as well as prolactin and dopamine and these other pieces, we really want to protect the psychic and physical conditions of the lactating parent to be able to accomplish this. So looking at continuity and sustainability of lactation goals, of continuity from the prenatal to the postpartum period, and of that thriving state to continue, we know that oxytocin has a big role to play. So in pregnancy, oxytocin increases as much as 4 times in our system. We also know that the number of receptors of oxytocin, especially on the uterus, increase. And as I mentioned, that those receptors are responsible for labor contractions. Research also shows that higher levels of oxytocin in pregnancy predict a longer duration of exclusive breastfeeding. And again, this is going to be language that uses maternal breastfeeding language because it's based on research that uses that language. I also want to note that the author of this book is based in the EU, and so I don't think the book is even in English originally, so maybe newer versions have some different translations. But yes, higher levels of oxytocin in pregnancy predict a longer duration of exclusive breastfeeding. So that's saying there's a continuity here of how safe and supported and healthily, how their health is facilitated in pregnancy. That's gonna also translate into not only success, but duration of breastfeeding if exclusive lactation is a goal. We also know that more pulses of that oxytocin, which remember starts a minute after feeding, more of those pulses during breastfeeding are also associated with a longer duration. So this speaks to the importance of feeding on demand, to meeting the signals of cluster feeding, to those early stages of contact, regardless of how much milk someone thinks they're making. The suckling that stimulates the pulses is associated with a longer duration of exclusive breastfeeding. We also know that exclusive breastfeeding itself is associated with higher overall levels of oxytocin. And when somebody weans, we start to see that overall level decrease as soon as 24 hours. So breastfeeding is a specific oxytocin-inducing state of a human body. And that might lead you to ask, what comes first, a satisfied breastfeeding parent or longer and more frequent feeding at the breast? A supported breastfeeding family or an easier time feeding? And this is truly a chicken and egg question. I think we all know that, like, ideally everyone starts out with great support. But if someone's not getting support and they're not satisfied, longer and more frequent feeding at the breast may support that. And someone who's feeling satisfied because they had a peaceful birth may more easily be able to access longer and more frequent feeding at the breast because of the psychosocial aspect as it connects to these physiological cues. So when we are talking about how to support chest feeding, especially through stress or discomforts, without doing damage to nipples, of course, like oftentimes chest feeding is the solution for the challenges of chest feeding. More time practicing, more time getting confident with proper support and information and rest and nourishment. So we can do that and support the oxytocin functions and benefits about not just breastfeeding and chest feeding, but feeding in general. We know that feeding in general and the baby's ability to rest and digest and receive the milk, as well as the parent's sense of success and satisfaction, those are all going to be supported if we're in that rest and digest state, and if we have the conditions to trigger that oxytocin state. So that could be physiological and psychological triggers, including nutrition, hydration, rest, warmth, safety, even just to make milk, connectivity and response. So I'm warm enough to be comfortable and relaxed. I'm relaxed and comfortable enough with a sense of safety or privacy to be paying attention to my baby, to be comfortably in contact with my baby, to notice their visual and audio cues, and vice versa, for the baby to receive my smile, my cooing, my affirmation. And for both the parent and the baby, that confidence to continue and repeat the feeding process is going to come from that affirmation, encouragement, information if needed, and comfort measures if needed. So these are all within the doula scope, as well as lactation professionals and families' capacity to provide. But without some of them, it's really hard to continue the other. So if I'm not getting rest or eating or drinking water, I'm not warm and I don't feel safe, I'm probably gonna have a hard time making milk, let alone connecting with my baby. But if I can get those basic needs met, I can pay attention to my baby. And then when I get affirmation and encouragement and support, I can in turn affirm and encourage my baby who's also learning. Someone's baseline, as well as like the threshold it would take for a contraction or for milk ejection to happen. This is thought to be partially genetic or epigenetic. So whereas these conditions create an oxytocin state, or feeding is oxytocin state, labor is oxytocin state, when supported, an oxytocin trait might be something that we are born with or inherit over repeated conditions. This is really important to trauma-informed care. It also shows how valuable somatic trauma recovered therapies can be. If somebody does have a stress response in relationship to tactile stimulation at the breast, ideas around chest feeding, the constant demands on the body, or experiences that happen during birth or pregnancy in relationship to just the vulnerability of the process, working on those processes, whether those are things from a long time ago or from the last 10 months, to re-signal safety and capacity into the body can be really, really powerful. So if someone feels overwhelmed with fear or anxiety at the thought of, not having enough milk, people who are skilled in sharing somatic exercises can help that person regulate their nervous system, even in the face of that negative stimulus, whether it's someone being rude or giving discouraging words or a scary story in the news. It's kind of like exposure theory, and that certain somatic modalities can help people reclaim their body's functioning in response to prior trauma. And so just to kind of, I know we're over time, but wrap it up, we know that the baby's best habitat is these same cues and these same conditions for an oxytocin state. So seeing the caregiver's eyes, smelling the milk, tasting the milk, the touch of the hand, the touch of their skin to skin, being warm, feeling the hand and the support of the caregiver, moving with the caregiver, hearing their voice and their affirmation. And even, if someone's not using human milk, or they're using human milk in a lactation aid, or they're using pumped or donated milk at a bottle, even in that case, most of these can still be accomplished, right? So the benefits of human milk are cumulative, and then also the benefits of the body feeding process stand alone and are cumulative as well. There's a ton of benefits to human milk that I'm not going to get into today, but I do want to highlight that these parts of the process are accessible to all parents, regardless of feeding style, a feeding modality. So that's why lactation aids, or even just chest to chest, skin to skin feeding with a bottle, can be so supportive for the mutual exchange of thriving between parent and infant. And that's one of the awesome things about oxytocin. We can tap into it in creative ways, even if perhaps the full mechanism of body feeding isn't available to us. So to support that as a community and as providers, of course, as midwife Sydney said, we want to support physiological birth that projects the endocrine, immune, and nervous system and reflexes to allow all of these things to unfold. We want to support skin to skin and supportive touch for both parties. we want to normalize feeding on demand and attuning to infant cues, because that's going to create those repeated suckling exposures, that repeated pulses of oxytocin, and that longer term duration of chest feeding. We want to support suckling, whether it's in the early days or weeks or with a lactation aid. So whether we're trying to, support the beginning of chest feeding with lactation, or we're trying to support the overall benefits of suckling with lactation aid human milk, we can do that in either case. For the baby, for the parent, eye contact, verbal encouragement, a comfortable position, a huge one. So easy to attain in so many different settings, and not necessarily something we think about right away for digestion and feeding. And supportive information and quality professional care, which includes accessible trainings like this one. So helping community members and professionals to have accurate, humble, supportive information. And then, of course, a low stress and affirming environment. So not just being tolerated, but being affirmed regardless of our LGBTQIA expression, regardless of how our body looks, regardless of our ethnicity, regardless of our income, being able to be supported and affirmed in private and in public. We know that laid back chest feeding is one of the most physiologically conducive positions, and you can read more about that. It's, of course, traditional to the resting period of almost every culture on Earth, but specifically this laid back position. You can read about it in Biological Nurturing by Suzanne Colson. It comes with lots of other postpartum recovery tips in alignment with parental well-being being a precursor to baby's well-being. Also, as was mentioned earlier, paid parental leave so that we can do all of the above. And of course, breastfeeding friendly practices in your local businesses, clinics, other people's homes. And yeah, that's just a few of the things we can do to support the feeding relationship. And I will stop there.
Thank you. Thank you.
Amazing as always.
Any other comments or questions?
I just want to say that overall, every time I attend, every time I hear speakers and speakers who I've heard before, I always learn something new. My mind is always blown. I'm always like,
I paid off $495.
Mammals are amazing. Humans are amazing. The body is amazing. So I appreciate getting to listen to everyone and learn from everyone. And yeah, nipples are amazing. Chests and breasts are amazing. Oh my, yeah, the universe. My mind is blown. My mind is blown. Thank you, Jeslyn, as always.
Anyone else want to say something?
I've been reflecting lately a lot on how, I mean, we know all the reasons and all this, but why is it so often that my home birth families, body feeding is so much, it can have its own challenges and needs support, but generally speaking, goes so much smoother than my hospital-based families. And there's all the interventions, it's just that piece of it, the intervention of going into the hospital, but also even after birth, that such a there's so much emphasis by some well-meaning providers to have baby in the little bassinet after, right? Keep baby in there if you're gonna sleep. And so it's parents aren't allowed to rest and babies can't be with their parents. And then you wonder why this relationship gets messed
apart.
Isn't happening like it should. That, it's so simple. You can explain it, and there's so much to know, and there's so much that's complex about it, but the actual practice is so freaking simple. And it's what we're wired to want. And then there's this whole entire system and industry gaslighting us to tell us that that thing that we want is dangerous. And then we have all these problems. And then there's an industry that make profits off of those problems. But yeah, I was thinking just when you were presenting, like how amazingly like complex we are, and yet also how simple it is at the same time.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about this morning. And like, it is so simple, but there's like, it just makes so much sense once you've been learning about it for a while. You're like, of course, this is what supports that. But, you know, as I was learning those details about milk ejection and dilation of the ducts, it's like, there's so many opportunities for stress or abuse or lack of confidence because someone told you the wrong information to get in the way. Like there's so, like, because it's so much a cascade of events, there's all these stopping points that could become stopping points if somebody comes in and says that's not enough milk, or you're doing that wrong, or you're, you know, that's not what the baby needs, whatever it is that we tell people. But because oxytocin is a moderator of so many of these processes, of course, in relationship to other hormones as well, it's like, I really think that is such a key, because even after an interruption or a stressful event, if we can bring them back into what Dr. Balaza described, that thrive state with touch and encouragement and nutrition and rest and heat and care, it's always recoverable. And I think what happens is, if we keep getting stopped up at the same points or even different points, we might think we're broken. And it's like, actually, you've just been interrupted. Someone threw a wrench in here and they blocked you here, and you missed this part entirely because of your hospital experience. So it's really, like, as you said, it's so simple, but so complex. I hope that this piece about the baby and parent moderating each other's experience, and also as a community supporting that, can help us feel empowered, regardless of someone's experience, to create that thriving state.
Totally. I immediately also like brought back to my two distinct birth experiences, one which was in the hospital, my first birth, and my second, which was a home birth. And to re-envision what a hospital birth could even look like, that actually put at its center tending to this incredibly important physiological process of nurturing and stimulating and everything about it, oxytocin's functions, right? Just in the being woken up every few hours for labs, or the beeping thing in the room, or having a different nurse every day, or not knowing what time it is because the clock doesn't work and they ask you, what time did you breastfeed? And you're like, that was me. I felt like I was on a time warp, because every time they'd ask me what time it was, I said 3 o'clock, because the clock never moved, right?
Oh, dear.
And so it was the most weird, disorienting, mind melding experience to be institutionalized. And I think that institutionalization does something really profound to our psychology. And my sense is that it's completely diametrically opposed to trust, warmth, connection, relaxation. And it's just not in the design. So why are we surprised that the results reflect the design?
Exactly right.
Can't be surprised. And so I think that just having this conversation, like for me, I want to make like a giant list of things to stop doing this thing you guys think is so essential. Putting the baby in the plastic box thing. Stop swaddling the baby. If there's no reason to swaddle a baby for a mama, right? But it's done, right? The washing of the babies. I mean, all these things that we see are interrupting this natural unfolding process that would work just great if you took your foot off its neck, right? So I feel all the more empowered and armed with awesome information from your presentation, Jessalyn. Thank you so much for that, and all the beautiful reframing of how oxytocin hugs and dilates and works inside us in these beautiful ways. This is really useful language. Thank you.
It is so incredibly helpful. The more I learn and the more I'm exposed to, the more, I mean, for me as a Christian person, I just get totally reaffirmed in all the things I believe in about that. You know, that the energy that we breathe and walk in loves us. God loves us. And so, you know, birthing a baby can be this blissful, awesome, like you're looking at God experience, like you're looking at creative life force experience, and being that primary vessel of nourishment to your baby. I mean, that there's nothing more powerful. And these other institutions that are much less are trying to butt in between that relationship between people and their primal love. You know, there's so many things that get between couples' authentic love for each other, much less, you know, their babies. And it's all about get the baby out as quick as possible and get it away from its birthing person, get it away from its mother. Like the mother's now toxic. The baby needs to be down the hall, and everybody's sitting in the house watching the baby on TV on the baby monitor. I'm like, I'm screaming. So I love getting information like this, which is just loving and sweet and affirming in the way I personally believe life was meant to be, you know. And we have examples of how to do it, right? You go to an L&D ward in France, in a big city in France. It looks like a birthing center. It's beautiful. It's warm. You have the birth tub. And because they have socialized medicine, anyone goes there. You go there, even if you're not a citizen. If I was a pregnant tourist, I could give birth in this really nice environment, right? And as Mika's pointing out in the chat, and you won't see an OB because they don't assume you're going to need a surgeon right away. If there is a surgeon, there's one down the hall drinking some coffee or taking care of somebody who needs some surgery. They get there. There's more than one. But why are we, well, we know why. I mean, because unfortunately, we're in a culture that values money over people all the time. And so here we are. But we keep fighting the good fight, don't we, friends? So I am going to say that we are done for this year. What do y'all think? Laura Cox and I are plotting and planning. We hope to have an in-person festival next year and do something wonderful because it will be 10 years of Oakland Breastfeeding Festival. And I'm so excited about that. I want to thank everybody for their time and energy. All the speakers who came and went. Laura, who made her wonderful video. Thank you to Elizabeth. And for the folks who watch this on YouTube, thank you for your time and attention. It's a long time. I'm glad you hung in there with us. Please like, comment, and subscribe, because that stuff's important in the world of YouTube, because when you do that, it lets other people, it makes the algorithm recommend our video to other people. And so the reason why one reason why I want to do this is that I want to get this information out into the wide world, and I want as many people as possible to see it. And I'm always tickled as I go through the year how many people have seen our breastfeeding festival who weren't there in person and who tell me about it and tell me how much they enjoyed it. So yay. So let's keep that going. And I am going to, in a second, stop recording now, and then we can say our private good nights. But for YouTube land, good night, peace and baby blessings to you.